It's hard to say exactly when things started feeling off. Looking back now, it all seems so obvious. But when you're in it, when it's your own life falling apart, sometimes it's like trying to see through fog glass. Dahlia and we had 10 solid years together. I don't mean the perfect fairy tale stuff you read about. We fought over the usual things like bills and family gatherings, but we had our rhythm. Or so I thought. When Dahlia landed her promotion, I was thrilled for her. She busted her ass to get it. The late nights, the work calls during dinner. I chalked it up to ambition, something she'd always had more of than me. The promotion meant a bigger paycheck, sure, but it also meant more travel. Suddenly, every couple of weeks, she was gone for a few nights, whisked off to God knows where for some critical team meeting or project launch. At first, it was just business as usual, but after a while I noticed she started coming home different. I couldn't put my finger on it, not right away, but she'd come back tired, way more than before, and with this strange kind of distance in her eyes, like she was somewhere else even when she was sitting right across from me. Our conversations became shallow, like she was avoiding anything deeper, anything real. I'd ask her how her trip went, and she'd give me a 2-word answer before saying she was too wiped out to talk. I let it go, figuring work was taking more out of her than usual. But then my friend Liam noticed it too. We were out one night, just me, Liam, and a couple of guys. A typical guy's night, talking shit, tossing back a few beers. Out of nowhere, Liam goes, "Hey, is everything all right with you and Dahlia? I've noticed she's been kinda off." I laughed it off at first, didn't want to give it much thought. But Liam didn't let it go. "I mean it, man," he pressed. "At that company event last month, she barely said a word to anyone. And she used to be, the life of the party. Hearing it from someone else hit different. I'd been telling myself she was just stressed, that the job was getting to her, but Liam saw it too. That's when this gnawing feeling started building inside me, like a splinter under my skin. I brushed it off, at least outwardly, but inside, I couldn't shake it. A few days after that, I decided to surprise her at work. Thought maybe I'd take her out to lunch, remind her of the life she had waiting at home. I knew her schedule well enough, so I showed up around noon. Her secretary, Helena, was there, young, a bit too chirpy for a Monday morning. When she saw me, her face lit up with that look people get when they're happy to see the husband. She goes, "Oh, Mr. Joshua, Dahlia's already left for a meeting with a colleague." The way she said it was so casual, like it was nothing but that one word, colleague, clanged in my head. I asked her which colleague, trying to keep my voice steady. Helena shrugged, said she didn't know, but that they'd left a while ago for some off-site meeting. I thanked her and left, but that whole drive home, my mind was spinning. Who was this colleague? Why hadn't she mentioned him or the meeting? And why was she so secretive about it? That night, I waited up for her. When she finally walked through the door, I could feel this anger bubbling up, but I kept it in check. She looked exhausted, barely glancing my way before trudging to the bedroom. I followed her, asking how her meeting went. She gave me this look, half surprised, half annoyed. "It was fine, just work stuff," she muttered, brushing me off. I pressed a little more, trying to act casual, asking if she'd been out with anyone from her team. She hesitated, a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to catch it. "Just Austin," she said finally. "You remember Austin, right? From my team?" Now I knew who Austin was. A young, single, too good-looking guy who joined her team a few months back. Dahlia had mentioned him before, just in passing, saying he was good at his job and nice to work with. But seeing her mention him now, with that flicker of hesitation, made me question everything. I nodded, acting like it was nothing, but inside, every nerve was on edge. Days turned into weeks, and I started paying closer attention. Little things stood out. She'd get a message on her phone, and her expression would change. Sometimes a smile, sometimes a slight frown, but always something that felt private. If I asked her about it, she'd shrug it off, saying it was just work stuff. I wanted to believe her, I really did, but that feeling kept growing, clawing its way up, filling me with doubt. Then came another night out with Liam. We were at this pub, same as before when he brought it up again. "Look, I don't mean to meddle," he started, clearly uneasy, "but I saw Dahlia with this guy at a work event last week. Looked like they were close." He glanced at me, probably expecting me to laugh it off or tell him he was seeing things, but I didn't. I just sat there, staring at my beer, feeling the walls close in. "Did you notice anything?" I finally asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Liam shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "I mean, she was talking to him a lot, that's all. I didn't see anything inappropriate, if that's what you're asking. But the damage was done. I couldn't shake the image Liam had put in my head. The more I thought about it, the more it started to make sense. The long nights, the missed calls, the vague responses. It all pointed to something I didn't want to believe. But I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I couldn't keep it all in anymore. The thoughts were like a damn infection, eating at me from the inside out. Part of me wanted to just confront Dahlia head on, let the words spill out. But then, what if I was wrong? What if it was all in my head, just some paranoid mess I'd created for myself? That's when Isabel came to mind. Dahlia's younger sister had always been a bit of an outsider in the family, the opposite of her golden child sister. It's not like I was particularly close to her, but we got along well enough. And I knew one thing for sure. She'd never been Dahlia's biggest fan. Maybe she'd noticed something I hadn't. Maybe she'd helped me see things clearly. So, one evening, after stewing in my thoughts for too long, I gave her a call. Isabel picked up after the second ring, and I heard her familiar, warm voice on the other end. "Josh, everything okay?" "Yeah, well, no. I'm not even sure why I'm calling, Isabel," I said, my voice feeling foreign even to my own ears. I feel like I need to talk to someone. About Dahlia." There was a pause, the kind that tells you someone already knows where this is going. "Meet me at the cafe on 5th in about an hour," she finally replied, her tone softer, almost hesitant. I agreed, feeling a mixture of relief and nervousness settle over me. Talking to Isabel felt like a risk, but it was a risk I was more than willing to take. When I walked into the cafe, Isabel was already seated by the window, swirling her coffee absent-mindedly. She looked up and gave me a small, sympathetic smile. "You look terrible, Josh. What's going on?" I took a deep breath, settling into the chair across from her. "It's Dahlia. Things have been off for a while now. She's always tired, always distant, and there's this guy, Austin." I stopped, not even sure how much to say. I hesitated. "I think she's hiding something." Isabel's face tightened, her expression suddenly unreadable. "You think she's having an affair?" she whispered, leaning in closer. Her voice was careful, but there was something sharp in her gaze, something I couldn't quite place. I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak. "Listen, Josh," she said, her voice steady. "You're not crazy. I mean, I've noticed it too. She's different lately. Cold even. And you know, you're not the only one who's noticed." She looked away briefly, her eyes narrowing. "I've seen her at that cafe on 8th a few times. She goes there more than you'd think for someone who's supposedly too busy to call home." Her words felt like a punch to the gut, each one settling heavily on top of my doubts. Could it really be Austin?" I asked, half hoping she'd say no. But Isabel just shook her head. "I don't know, but it sounds like he's involved somehow. I can keep an eye out if you want to see if anything unusual comes up." She was trying to be calm, but I could see a flash of something darker, something protective. Our conversation that day turned into an unexpected comfort. We didn't just talk about Dahlia. We ended up talking about a lot of things. Life, people's disappointments, the stuff you don't get to talk about in polite company. Isabel shared stories of her own struggles with relationships, the loneliness she often felt, especially being the black sheep of the family. Somehow, in the middle of my mess, we found common ground. Before we left, Isabel touched my arm gently. "You know, Josh, if you need someone to talk to, I'm here." "Really?" There was a sincerity in her voice that felt strangely grounding. I nodded, managing a weak smile. Maybe I wasn't as alone in this as I'd thought. The following week, Isabel and I met up again, both of us more prepared this time. We decided to try and catch Dahlia in her element, at that cafe on 8th. Isabel had already been there a few times, trying to see if Dahlia's meetings lined up with her actual work schedule. Turns out they didn't. That Tuesday, we sat near the back, hidden behind a wall of ferns and overly cheerful decor. Isabel ordered coffee, but my mind was too jumbled to even think about food or drink. I kept my eyes glued to the door, nerves twisting my stomach. After half an hour, Dahlia walked in, and she wasn't alone. Austin strolled in behind her, looking far too comfortable by her side. They picked a table near the window, and I felt this nauseating wave of anger and betrayal crash over me. Isabel placed a hand on my arm, steadying me. "Wait," she whispered. "We don't want to blow this. Let's just see what they do." I nodded, forcing myself to stay still, to breathe. They ordered, chatted, laughed, her hand brushing his arm every so often. The sight was like a slap to the face. Every time she leaned in, every smile, every laugh, it was like seeing a stranger in my wife's skin. "I can't do this," I whispered, looking away, trying to keep the bile from rising. Isabel squeezed my arm again. "Just a little longer, Josh. We'll get the answers we need." After what felt like an eternity, Austin left. I watched him go, wanting nothing more than to confront him, demand answers. But instead, I stayed put, watching Dahlia sip her coffee with a relaxed smile. A smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Once she left, Isabel turned to me, her face a mask of determination. "This isn't over, Josh. We'll figure out exactly what's going on." Her words were a lifeline, keeping me grounded even as my world crumbled around me. As I drove home, the memory of Dahlia's laugh echoed in my mind, a taunting reminder of how little I knew her anymore. When I got back, she was already home, her expression unreadable as she greeted me, like she hadn't just been cozying up to Austin that very afternoon. I didn't say a word, didn't bring it up. Instead, I let the resentment build, festering under the surface, waiting for the moment to crack it wide open. And Isabel was there every step of the way, her loyalty and strength becoming a strange source of comfort I never thought I'd need. After that day in the cafe, it was like the final piece of my faith in Dahlia crumbled. There was no denying what I saw, and yet I couldn't bring myself to confront her, not without something concrete. I wanted proof, hard evidence, not just a hunch or a few shady coffee dates with Austin. If she was going to destroy everything we'd built together, she wouldn't do it with half-truths and excuses. Isabel and I had come up with a plan. She'd mentioned an upcoming corporate event Dahlia had talked about, some big gala or awards night, I don't remember exactly. What I did remember was that Dahlia had specifically told me I couldn't come. "It's just for employees," she'd said, a casual throwaway excuse that grated on my nerves. I nodded like a good husband, pretending I didn't care. But now, Isabel and I saw it for what it was, an opportunity. The night of the event, Isabel and I arrived early. We parked a good distance away from the venue, keeping ourselves out of sight. I felt ridiculous, like some third-rate detective in a bad movie, but desperation does strange things to a person. I hadn't told anyone else what was going on. This mission was just between me and Isabel. Even Liam, who'd started this whole mess by pointing out Dahlia's strange behavior, had no clue what I was up to now. We slipped in through a side entrance Isabel had scoped out earlier. She'd managed to snag us a couple of guest passes, and we kept a low profile, sticking to the edges of the crowd. Dahlia was easy to spot. She wore a deep green dress, one I'd never seen before, her hair perfectly done, laughing and mingling with her colleagues like nothing was amiss. And then I saw him, Austin. The way they moved around each other was subtle, almost practiced. They'd keep their distance, then drift closer, as if pulled by some invisible string. At one point, I saw him lean in, whispering something in her ear that made her laugh. A laugh I hadn't heard in months. "Stay calm, Josh," Isabel whispered, sensing the tension coiled inside me. I took a shaky breath, keeping my eyes fixed on them. "I just need to know," I muttered, more to myself than to her. We stayed back, watching their every move, waiting for the moment they'd slip away. And then, as if on cue, Dahlia and Austin exchanged a glance, one that said more than words ever could. They walked out of the main hall, heading down a dimly lit corridor, toward a private area of the venue. "Follow me," Isabel whispered, taking the lead. We crept after them, keeping enough distance to stay hidden but close enough to catch every detail. They disappeared through a door at the end of the corridor, closing it softly behind them. My heart was pounding so loud, I was sure they'd hear it. Isabel gently grabbed my arm. "Wait here. I'll go take a look." Before I could argue, she slipped forward, moving with a confidence I didn't know she had. I waited in that dark corridor, feeling every second stretch into eternity. Finally, she came back, her face pale but resolved. It's them. They're together. That was it. The truth, stark and ugly. Part of me felt like the ground had disappeared from under my feet. And yet, there was also a strange sense of relief. The doubts were gone, replaced by cold, hard certainty. I wasn't crazy. This wasn't all in my head. I can't believe it, I muttered, feeling more numb than anything. But Isabel wasn't done. There's something else, she said, glancing back toward the hall. She's not just involved with Austin. I think there's someone else trying to get her attention. I blinked at her, not quite processing. What? Oh, a guy named Brett. Younger, works in her department. I saw him trying to cozy up to her earlier. She laughed him off, but it was, I don't know, Josh. I think she's enjoying all of this. The attention, the flirting. That realization was like a slap to the face. The woman I thought I knew, the one I'd trusted with every part of me, was now treating our marriage like a casual game. Just the idea of it made me sick. After that night, I knew I needed more than just Isabel's observations. I needed irrefutable proof. So I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I hired a private investigator, a guy named Andrew, who came highly recommended. I met him at a quiet bar a few days later, feeling like I was signing my life away with every word. Andrew didn't ask for any explanations. He'd heard it all before. He gave me a hard, assessing look before handing me his business card. You'll have what you need soon enough, he said, his voice all business. Over the next few weeks, Andrew provided me with more than I bargained for. Pictures of Dahlia with Austin, receipts from hotels, dinner bills. Every little detail was laid out in black and white, a brutal reminder of just how far things had gone. One night, as I sifted through the evidence in my kitchen, Isabel stopped by to check on me. She sat down across from me, glancing at the photos and receipts spread across the table. You okay? She asked, her voice gentle. Honestly, I don't know. I looked up, meeting her eyes. There was something there, a warmth and understanding I hadn't realized I'd missed. It's all so messed up. She nodded, reaching out to squeeze my hand. I know, Josh, but you're not alone in this. You got people who care about you. Her words hit me in a way I didn't expect. In that moment, Isabel wasn't just Dahlia's sister. She was someone who understood my pain, someone who'd seen the best and worst of me without judgment. We sat there in silence for a while, just existing in the same space, sharing the weight of everything we'd discovered. Isabel was my anchor, keeping me from drifting into a place I wasn't sure I could come back from. And somehow, despite the betrayal and heartache, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The more I dug into Dahlia's betrayal, the more the hurt twisted into something heavier, more toxic. I kept asking myself how she could do this, how someone I thought I knew could lie, manipulate, betray me in ways I hadn't even imagined. But the evidence was undeniable, and no matter how many nights I spent staring at the photos, receipts, and hotel bills, it didn't change the fact that she had wrecked the life we'd built together. In those quiet, heavy moments, Isabel was my only refuge. She was the one person who didn't just know about Dahlia's affair. She felt its impact just as deeply. Maybe it was because she knew Dahlia better than anyone, or maybe it was because she, too, had been sidelined, overlooked in ways that left their own scars. Whatever it was, we shared a connection I hadn't expected, a lifeline I desperately clung to as my world unraveled. One night, Isabel came over with a bottle of bourbon, the kind of strong, cheap stuff that goes straight to your bones. She sat across from me in the dim light of the living room, the table between us covered in papers and photos, a crime scene laid out in black and white. Are you sure you want to keep these? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. She gestured to the pile of evidence Andrew had compiled. I mean, you've already got more proof than you need. I shrugged, taking another swig. I don't know, I guess I just can't believe it's real. She nodded, her eyes softening in that way that seemed to cut through my anger, hitting me right where the sadness lived. Yeah, I get that. She reached out, placing her hand over mine. Her touch was warm, steady, a grounding force I didn't realize I'd needed. We talked that night, not just about Dahlia, but about our lives, our frustrations, our disappointments. I opened up in ways I hadn't allowed myself to with anyone else, sharing things I'd locked away for years. Isabel listened, never judging, her presence a quiet reassurance that maybe I wasn't as alone in this mess as I felt. And then, there was this moment. A silence hung between us, thick with everything left unsaid. I glanced down at her hand on mine, feeling a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. A warmth, an attraction that I tried to push away, but it stayed lingering, tempting. I whispered, not sure what I wanted to say, or if I should even be saying anything at all. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. Josh, she stopped, her voice catching. For a moment, I thought she'd pull away, that we'd leave it at that, a line not to be crossed. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned closer, her hand still resting on mine, her breath warm against my skin. And before I knew it, we crossed that line, a boundary we both knew we shouldn't cross but did anyway. What started as a gesture of comfort turned into something more, something that was both a betrayal and a release. In that moment, all the anger, the betrayal, the hurt, none of it mattered. For the first time in months, I felt something real, something honest. When it was over, we sat there, neither of us saying a word. I expected regret, shame, anything that would remind me of the life I was leaving behind. But instead, there was only a quiet acceptance, a strange sense of peace in the chaos. Isabel looked at me, her gaze steady, her expression soft but serious. It doesn't have to mean anything, she murmured, almost as if she were talking to herself as much as to me. I mean, maybe it's just the hurt, the anger. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I didn't know what it meant, or if it even mattered. All I knew was that for the first time in a long time, I felt seen, understood in a way that went beyond words. Over the next few days, I tried to focus on the task at hand. I met with Andrew again, going over the latest batch of evidence, preparing myself for the inevitable confrontation with Dahlia. Every time I thought about it, I felt the anger rise, a bitterness that tasted like ash. But then I'd think of Isabel, of that night we shared, and somehow it made the whole thing a little more bearable. A week later, Isabel and I met up again. We sat in my kitchen, a stack of papers and photos between us, going over the evidence one last time. It was strange, surreal, like we were planning a takedown, a coup against the woman who had wronged us both. But there was something else there too, an unspoken understanding that went beyond Dahlia, beyond revenge. It was just us. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her voice steady but her eyes filled with something softer, a hint of worry. I looked at her, feeling the weight of everything settle on my shoulders. "Honestly, I don't know. But it's time. I can't keep living like this." She nodded, reaching out to squeeze my hand. "I'm here, Josh. Whatever you need." Those words, simple as they were, hit me harder than anything else. Isabel was there, through the worst of it, through the moments of doubt and anger and confusion. She was there when I had no one else to turn to, when the life I thought I knew crumbled at my feet. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. I'd spent months living in the shadows, piecing together a betrayal I never saw coming, clinging to the anger and hurt like a lifeline. But now, it was time to confront it, to lay everything bare and let the chips fall where they may. Before I left, I sent Isabel a text, a simple message. "Thank you for everything." I didn't expect a response, but a few minutes later, my phone buzzed. "You're not alone in this, Josh. Remember that." Her words stayed with me as I drove, a reminder of the connection we'd forged in the ashes of our shared pain. Whatever happened next, whatever came out of that confrontation with Dahlia, I knew one thing for sure. Isabel would be there, a constant in the storm, a reminder of what it meant to be truly seen. I knew it was time to face her. I had all the proof, all the damning pieces lined up neatly, as if that could somehow make the pain feel organized, controlled. But nothing about this was controlled. My life, our marriage, it was shattered, a chaos I could barely hold in my hands. The day Dahlia came back from her latest business trip, I was ready. I waited for her in the living room, The evidence spread out on the coffee table like some twisted display, a testament to every lie she'd ever told me. She walked in, her face bright with some story she'd probably rehearsed, not knowing her excuses would mean nothing this time. When she saw me sitting there, saw the papers, photos, receipts, her face fell. What is all this, Josh?" she stammered, her eyes darting over the table, lingering on the hotel receipts, the pictures of her and Austin that Andrew had collected. "It's everything you thought you could hide from me, Dahlia," I said, my voice as cold and controlled as I could manage. "Every lie. Every single time you looked me in the eyes and fed me some bullshit about late meetings and business trips." I shook my head, anger flaring. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face. But she tried to play it off, taking a deep breath and squaring her shoulders. "Josh, you're misunderstanding. It's not what you think." "Really?" I leaned forward, barely able to keep the fury in check. "So what am I misunderstanding here, Dahlia? The photos? The hotel bookings? The texts?" I threw her phone at her feet, already unlocked to reveal a chain of messages she'd sent to Austin. I'd read enough of them to know the truth, each word a punch to the gut. She bent down, picked up the phone, staring at the screen as if seeing it for the first time. You went through my phone? That's what you're focusing on?" I laughed bitterly, feeling the anger morph into something darker, a disgust I could barely contain. "You're a piece of work. You know that. After all this, all the years I trusted you, you turn this around and try to play the victim?" She flinched, her face crumpling for just a second before she caught herself. "You don't understand, Josh," she said, her voice low, almost pleading. "You haven't exactly been there for me lately. You've been distant cold. I was alone in Austin. He was there. That hit a nerve." I stood up, barely holding back. "Don't you dare pin this on me. I wasn't the one sneaking around, lying to your face. You made the choice, Dahlia. You chose to step out, to betray everything we built together." My voice cracked, and I hated that I still felt that raw hurt, that she still had that power over me. She threw her hands up, as if she were the one wronged. "And what about you, huh? You're not so innocent either. I know about you and Isabel." The accusation hung in the air, a bitter, poisonous thing. I blinked, caught off guard, but only for a second. I straightened, meeting her gaze with cold certainty. "Yeah, I'm not denying it. But don't twist this, Dahlia. This is about you. What Isabel and I have, whatever it is that came after. After you threw away our marriage for some cheap fling." She scoffed, her expression twisting with contempt. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? Like you haven't changed at all. Like you didn't just check out of our life without a word." "I checked out because you pushed me out." The words erupted, louder than I'd intended, my voice breaking with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "I tried, Dahlia. For years I tried. But you turned into someone I didn't recognize, someone who could lie to me every damn day and not feel a thing. And all this time, you were with him, laughing at me behind my back, making a fool out of me." She fell silent, her defiance cracking, something sad and defeated slipping through. "Josh," she trailed off, her gaze dropping to the floor. For the first time, I saw it a flicker of remorse. Or maybe it was just the weight of getting caught. At that moment, I couldn't bring myself to care. The silence between us stretched, the broken pieces of our marriage lying like shattered glass around us. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, forcing the final words out, the ones I knew I needed to say to free myself from this nightmare. "It's over, Dahlia. There's nothing left to save. I'm done." She looked up, her eyes wide with shock and maybe a bit of fear. You don't mean that?" "Yes, I do," I replied, my voice hollow but firm. "I deserve better than this. Better than you." For a long moment, we just stood there, two strangers who once shared a life, now separated by the bitter truth. She didn't say another word, didn't try to defend herself or beg for forgiveness. She just turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the weight of our shattered promises. After she left, I stood there, staring at the empty doorway, feeling the anger drain away, replaced by a strange, hollow emptiness. I was free, but at a cost I wasn't sure I was ready to face. My marriage, my life, All of it felt like a distant memory, something that belonged to another person. A few hours later, Isabel came over. I hadn't told her what happened, but she took one look at me and knew. She pulled me into a hug. No words, just the steady warmth of her presence. And for the first time, I felt something break inside me, a wall I'd been holding up for too long. I pulled back, looking into her eyes, feeling something stronger, more real than anything I'd felt with Dahlia in years. "Thank you, for everything." She gave me a small, sad smile, her hand reaching up to touch my cheek. "You don't have to thank me, Josh. I'm just here. I don't know what the future holds. Don't know if Isabel and I can build something out of the ashes of our broken lives." But in that moment, I felt a glimmer of hope, a small piece of myself I thought I'd lost forever. Whatever happened next, I knew I wasn't alone. The days after that confrontation with Dahlia felt like an open wound. The anger had faded, leaving a raw emptiness, a strange stillness in the life we'd once shared. She'd moved out that night, no dramatic goodbyes, just a few mumbled words about needing space. I didn't argue. There was nothing left to say, no words that could undo the damage. I just watched her leave, feeling the weight of a life now divided. In those early days, Isabel was there for me in a way I didn't expect. She stayed close, keeping me grounded through the worst of it. There were nights when she'd come over, and we'd just sit together in silence, not needing words. She had this way of making the loneliness feel a little less sharp, a little less like a constant reminder of what I'd lost. One evening, she showed up at my door with a bottle of wine and a crooked smile. "Thought you could use some company," she said, her voice gentle but steady. I let her in, grateful for the comfort her presence brought. We settled in on the couch, the silence between us easy, familiar. As we drank, the conversation turned to memories of our shared past, childhood moments that had almost faded, buried under years of life and loss. We laughed, reminisced, filling the space with stories that reminded me of a simpler time, a time before betrayal and heartbreak. At one point, she turned to me, her eyes soft, almost hesitant. "You know, I never thought we'd end up here like this." I nodded, a bittersweet smile crossing my face. "Me neither. But maybe it's not such a bad thing." I paused, searching for the right words. "You've been here for me, in ways I didn't even know I needed. And I just don't know what I'd have done without you." Her gaze softened, and she reached out, her hand covering mine. "You don't have to do this alone, Josh. Whatever you need, I'm here." In that moment, I felt a quiet certainty, a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. It wasn't about rushing into anything new. It was about allowing myself to heal, to feel something other than anger and hurt. Isabel and I hadn't planned any of this, hadn't expected the closeness that had grown between us. But life has a way of surprising you, of finding beauty in the most broken places. Over the next few months, we took things slow, letting our relationship grow naturally, without the weight of expectations. Isabel was patient, understanding, never pushing me to move faster than I was ready for. She knew the hurt I carried, the scars Dahlia had left behind, and somehow, she managed to give me space while staying close enough to be there when I needed her. One weekend, we took a trip to a cabin she'd rented up north. It was a small, quiet place by the lake, surrounded by towering trees and the gentle sounds of nature. We spent the days hiking, talking about our dreams, our fears, all the things we'd kept hidden for too long. It felt like a fresh start, a way to let go of the past and look forward to something new. One morning, as the sun rose over the lake, painting the water in shades of orange and pink, Isabel turned to me, a quiet smile playing on her lips. "I never thought I'd find happiness here, with you, after everything that happened. But, I don't know. This feels right." I looked at her, feeling that same sense of peace settle over me. "It does," I agreed, pulling her close, my heart steady for the first time in months. Maybe this is exactly where we were meant to end up. Over time, my friends noticed the change. Liam was the first to mention it one night, as we sat around a fire in his backyard, the familiar warmth of friendship easing the scars I'd carried for so long. "You look happier, man," he said, nudging me with a grin. Guess things worked out with Isabel? Huh? I nodded, a genuine smile tugging at my lips. Yeah, she's something else. The guys exchanged knowing looks, offering quiet words of support that I hadn't known I needed. For the first time in ages, I felt whole, like I was finally moving forward instead of looking back at the pieces of a life that no longer fit. And then came the hardest part, filing for divorce. It wasn't about revenge or anger anymore. It was about closure, about letting go of something that had once meant everything to me, but had since turned into a reminder of betrayal. I went through the motions, signing the papers, attending the meetings, feeling that final weight lift as I closed the chapter on Dahlia. When the divorce was finalized, Isabel was there, waiting for me outside the courthouse. She didn't say a word, just wrapped me in a hug, her arms warm and steady, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I felt like I could finally breathe, like the weight of the past had lifted, leaving room for something new. We stood there, in that quiet, unassuming moment, feeling the relief settle over us. Isabel pulled back, her gaze meeting mine, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. So, what now? I took a deep breath, feeling a newfound sense of freedom, a fresh start just within reach. Now we make a life for ourselves, a real one built on honesty, built on us. From that point on, Isabel and I focused on the future, letting the scars of the past heal in their own time. It wasn't perfect, no relationship is, but it was real, and it was ours. We faced the tough days, the moments of doubt, together, building a bond that felt deeper, more honest than anything I'd known before. One evening, as we sat on the porch of our new place, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Isabel reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. Josh, I know this journey has been a mess, and it's taken us places we never thought we'd go, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. I looked at her, feeling the truth of her words resonate within me. Neither would I. I never thought I'd find you. But here we are. And with that, I let the past fade, knowing that I'd found something stronger, more resilient, in the arms of someone who'd been there all along. Life had thrown us together in the most unexpected way, but sometimes the most broken paths lead to the places we're meant to be. As the night settled around us, I knew that whatever came next, Isabel and I would face it together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to let go, to build a future from the ashes, knowing that this new beginning was finally, truly mine.
My cheating wife paid the ultimate price for her affair after I, her betrayed husband, found out. A few weeks back, I saw someone coming to my house on the new doorbell camera, but I never saw them leave. The next day, the footage disappeared. So playing detective and starting to investigate, my soon-to-be ex-wife STBXW realized I was onto her. She thought I had found evidence, probably from the recently installed doorbell camera she deleted. I was setting up in-home cameras and Vs at the time. However, she ended up confessing to an ongoing affair lasting about a year, during most of the time I spent helping my elderly parent. She admitted I deserved better and suggested a fair divorce, selling the house and splitting the proceeds. She might even pay alimony for a while. We share most of the debt, and the house sale should cover it, leaving a bit to start over. It's disheartening and unfair. I admit I felt anger and wanted revenge, but there aren't many people to expose her to who would care. No one on the other person's side to expose to. He's single, divorced, and surprisingly more informed about my marriage than I was. Their relationship isn't close, and it's likely not her first time. Despite the urge for revenge, I let it go without seeking more pain. This situation comes at a crucial time as I deal with elder care issues, and I don't have the energy or desire to fight for anything. She offered to fix things, but we both know there's too much pain and wrong between us. I'm still broken from being cheated on over 25 years ago. Some scars never heal. I've recently questioned if my entire relationship was a rebound, but I'm a committed person, and once I commit, I'm all in. Maybe I did it too soon. Now I can't see trusting anyone again. So there's no confrontation, revenge, or exposure, just two lives torn apart. Now I have to rebuild myself without my pride and ego. It's another failure in a long list of them. Life as I knew it is over, and I'm just going through the motions to handle things. I don't want to go home, but I have to pack and prepare the house for sale. Then, I need to find an apartment and I don't even know where I want to live. It's all just lousy. I wasted more than half my life on someone, The only blessing is not having kids, since once the divorce is final, I won't have to be in contact with her, though that will take time. Every time I hear her voice, the pain resurfaces. My version of pain shopping is looking back at our pictures and the otherwise good times we had. I can't figure out why I'm so stuck in the past, mourning something I thought I was ready to move on from. I lie awake thinking about everything I did wrong, believing I was never good enough for anyone, and wondering why I deserve to be treated poorly. I reflect on how crappy my life is and why I always seem to end up on the losing side. Now I'm old, broken, and feel like I don't deserve this crappy life. No hopes, no dreams. Just alone in my thoughts. More thoughts from later last night. She hasn't even called or texted me since I left. I did tell her not to, and I meant it. She probably knew I did, but not a single sorry, not a "are you okay?" Is she just sitting at home watching a show like it's any other Tuesday? Or maybe not. During the Christmas before last, we discussed how we ended up in a dead bedroom. I mentioned that about 15 years ago, we went through many premature births from IVF, and the experience scared me away from closeness for a long time. I was terrified of accidentally getting her pregnant and losing the baby. It led both of us to seek mental health help, and we barely pulled out of deep depressions with help and luck. Now, things have worsened. After her confession of a year-long affair, I said something very hurtful about her deserving to lose our kids. I might send her an apology text for that statement. Could saying my fears from over a year ago have triggered her to cheat on me? I only shared that with my therapist at the time, and we decided it wasn't the right time to discuss it with her. Maybe she blames me for our years of a dead bedroom. Maybe it's all my fault. Oh God, what have I done? After thinking it over, against my better judgment, I called. I knew she probably wouldn't pick up, so I left a voicemail apologizing for what I said. I admitted it was hurtful and not true. I acknowledged that it's over and suggested we handle it like adults in our 50s, not like the 20-somethings we were when we met. I expressed hope that she finds what she needs and left it at that. My wife called me last night. She appreciated my apology and knew the things I had said were to try to hurt her. We didn't discuss much, except for her apologizing again and blah blah blah. I did tell her I would be coming home this weekend and that I needed her not to be there. It was mostly civil, but I made it clear that I don't care where she goes. I suggested she stay with her boyfriend since that's who she wanted anyway. She denied it, insisting she wants me back and that we can work it out. She asked for one chance, promising to do anything to make it up. I'll admit I wanted nothing more than to go back in time to any time other than the last year, that I would even go to the worst times in our lives instead of now. But I stood firm this time and told her I don't see any way we can be together now. It's been a year, and I can't imagine feeling the same for her. I only asked one question: how many times? She stayed quiet for a long time, but I refused to say anything. She asked if I really wanted to know, not wanting to hurt me more. I said I need to know. That's when she hurt me even more, revealing it was only a few times in the beginning. After about a month, it was almost every day when I was away, and some weekends when she claimed to be at the gym for about 6 months. In the last few months, it was about once or twice a week while I was away. It made me sick. I muted the call to let out some of that pain. So, she was close to him more times in a year than we have been in the past 10, 15 years. Hundreds of times. Maybe even more than the beginning of our relationship. I wanted to ask more questions, but I was too hurt and ashamed. I wanted to know if he was better, bigger, and what they did, but I couldn't take any more. I just said she should go to him this weekend so I can be alone at home and gather more of my important things. I don't even have a permanent place to take them. I've been awake, got a bottle of good scotch, and now I have to work and take care of my parent while hungover. As I thought we had agreed, I'm back at the house to gather some things. Thank goodness she's nowhere in sight. I'm gathering some documents I forgot when I left last weekend, packing clothes and other things. It's going faster than I thought. I'm determined to keep moving before I get too down. In the basement, packing up a few things is tough, but I want to keep moving. Faintly, over the tunes, I hear water running in the pipes. It goes on for a while before I notice. I walk upstairs and hear the shower going. I'm stunned. I make coffee and decide it's better to go out to my car. I sit in the driveway, considering driving away, but I just sit there, stunned. I start writing a nasty text but decide against it, opting to wait for her to leave. My new neighbor introduces himself as I stand outside having a smoke. I don't tell him anything but try to be cordial. As we part ways, the garage door opens, and she's behind her car, asking to speak to me. I stand through introductions from the neighbor and my wife. We go inside, and I'm still dumbstruck. I ask why she's here. She explains she can't check into the place she's staying until later today and was at the gym. She thought I wouldn't mind showering and grabbing more things. She assumed she could come and go without a problem since she didn't see me around initially. I stand there wondering who this person in front of me is. Luckily, after a brief and awkward apology on her part and a suggestion for more counseling, I look her in the eye and say no. I tell her to leave. I have things to do, I add. She agreed to stay away. I say, this is what you caused, and go back to the basement. I sit here typing this, trying to control myself and my blood pressure. I just heard the garage door open and close, so thankfully she's gone. Now I'm a bit of a mess, wanting to get back to packing, but my bourbon collection is staring me in the face. I already had one good belt earlier. I know if I have another this early, today will be even more of a bust. So here it goes. Sunday comes after another night without sleep, filled with packing and a lot of anguish. Everything was tough, the memories, pictures, and items we had chosen together. Our wedding album and other things just stirred up more emotions I tried to control. Despite the difficulty, I persevered and focused on the things that mattered most to me. Unfortunately, one item brought me the most pain, the sealed urn containing our children's ashes. We had planned to combine our ashes and have a relative scatter them in the ocean near our favorite beach when one or both of us passed. Well, that plan is off now. But here's the thing. I don't know if it's wrong that I want to keep it with me. I know I have to discuss this with her eventually, but I'm unsure how that conversation will go. I don't know if we can have it opened and split the remains. It feels wrong, like neither of us is getting them. I'll ask my attorney about it when I retain one, I guess. I didn't mention it to her since my confidence in her was below zero at that point. Sunday evening, I'm nearly packed with things I'm taking with me for now. I wanted to have enough so that if I couldn't tolerate coming back for a few weeks at least, I'd have the important keepsakes, documents, etc. I knew she was supposed to return after 9:00, as we discussed, and I didn't really want to be there. I resisted the urge to dismantle all the electronics, reset the router, etc., out of spite. I felt like the bigger person for once, with the help of some supportive calls from a friend and some DMs. Anyway, it's about 7, and I'm loading the last bits into my car. Well, no shocker here, but yep, she shows up. She comes in looking a bit shaken, but not nearly as bad as I felt. She starts off saying it looked like I was ready to leave again. If I really had to go so early, she asked, could I at least talk to you? I was already frustrated that she was even there and wanted to be stronger than I knew I was. I said I didn't want to be too late and had to get back in time for the weekend to help with my parent. I told her I only had a few minutes, but if there was something important, she could tell me, and if needed, I could call her while driving. She then said she understood, but that she really needed me to know what was going on with her this weekend. She wished we could talk without me being angry. She said she spent the weekend alone. Not sure I believe this, but considering all that had happened and what she's done to us, she said she knew I couldn't forgive her, but that she does and always will love me and be in love with me forever. She said she knows I don't believe this now, but that she was so angry with herself for hurting me so badly and destroying the only man who ever loved her unconditionally and was always there for her. I was doing my best to not shout, sob, hug her, or anything, and just give her the stoic look of indifference. I'll admit I failed. My eyes watered up, but I struggled to not let the tears fall. Yeah, I failed at that too, but didn't really speak. I figured I'd just listen and hope to still just leave after she said what she had to. I listened to her say many things and justifications, reasons why she thought she did this for so long, why she didn't stop herself, why even when she thought I knew, she thought I just didn't or wouldn't care. She explained how she thought I must have been cheating for so many years, how I never seemed to want her, how we had been just roommates. Yet, she still knew I was the only man she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. She claimed she wanted to come to me so many times and confess, but knew I would never be able to accept her back if she told me what she did. At every turn, she repeatedly admitted it was entirely her fault and not mine. She mentioned her intention to seek counseling to understand why she engaged in such behavior for an extended period. She claimed our life together had crumbled because, despite having everything she desired, she thought she could live the rest of our lives without closeness, a decision she said she had come to terms with. She even stated that I could be with other people if I desired. It all seemed like typical behavior of someone who cheated, as I suspected. She eventually shared that during our conversation 2 Christmases ago, she became really upset when she learned I was afraid of closeness with her due to the fear of getting her pregnant again. She argued that my concerns about pregnancy were merely excuses, suggesting that I never truly wanted her or a family, especially when I resisted adopting. She admitted to growing upset every day, feeling that the only thing missing in our lives was closeness and family, which she believed I had kept from her. She expressed anger, believing that I had always blamed her for our child losses and lied every time I claimed otherwise. She felt I had been disgusted by her for losing our children, and that resentment lingered despite all those years. She claimed to have loved me enough for both of us. When my parents' health worsened, she thought I was just using it as an excuse to be away from her. Suddenly, everything clicked in her head, and she believed all her fears were true. She just wanted to be loved, and she felt I hadn't been truthful about my feelings all along. The person she referred to as the gym guy wasn't even a possibility until all these realizations hit her. She insisted she had never thought of being unfaithful and initially did it out of spite. Afterward, she realized how much she missed closeness. Although she kept telling him it was only about closeness, she claimed she had no intention of leaving me and didn't discuss me with him, though that seems doubtful now. Eventually, she admitted to growing a connection with him, telling him she hadn't felt like this in years, but it was nothing like what we shared. She reached the point where she insisted it was over and hoped I could forgive her. She wanted us to talk again to find a way forward, even if we decided to split, asking for time before considering divorce. She argued that I had been dishonest for many years and should give her the chance she believed she deserved. At this point, I'll confess I couldn't handle it anymore and exclaimed, "You deserve a chance? After a year of cheating?" I reminded her that when I shared my past fears, I had worked through them in therapy and had never mentioned them again to avoid this exact situation. I explained that despite my efforts in recent years to reach out, be more engaged, romantic, and connected, she responded minimally. I revealed that opening up my deepest secret with her was intended to bring us closer, but instead, she used it against me to cheat and devastate my life. I admitted I felt so shattered that I considered ending things almost daily, while she admitted having similar thoughts. She claimed she couldn't do that to me. In frustration, I screamed at her, "But you can do this to me for a year." After calming down, I asserted that I could never be open and vulnerable to her or anyone else. Again, knowing how she weaponized my fears, weaknesses, and honesty against me. It had forever changed me. Although I had feared this was the catalyst, after reflecting on everything last week about how and when it happened, according to her, I still wasn't sure I believed her claim that she hadn't done this before. I was already running about 45 minutes late from my planned departure time. I knew I had to speed up on the highway, and my mind wasn't in the right place. After leaving, I mentioned that I would ponder what she said, and if I had more to discuss, I'd call her while on the road. However, during the drive, all I could do was blast loud music and cry in intense pain, realizing my thoughts about causing this were confirmed. It was an even more agonizing ride than the first one after D-Day. In the end, I didn't call her. Now, in the sobering light of day, I question not only how I caused this, but also if there's even a slight chance she's seen my posts and is using them against me. To be honest, she isn't active on social media, and I doubt she uses Reddit at all. It was never on her phone, tablet, or in her App Store download history. I also reflect on how foolish I was to let my guard down with anyone, thinking there are things you should never share. If I had kept everything closed up, I wouldn't be in this situation. I consider this karma since I was on the verge of leaving last fall anyway. I feel like I'm just moving on autopilot, and this incident proves I should maintain the facade of being a happy guy and never let my guard down again. It feels like I ruined everything I had. I'm still consulting with my attorney and trying to stay on the path, as I don't know how I can come back to her after this. The truth is, she has reopened the wounds in my heart and torn away everything I was holding on to keep going. Sent via her work email, I informed X that I had hired someone to represent me in legal matters and requested information on who to connect them with. I advised X to seek counsel for the consequences of their actions. X expressed a desire to discuss the situation further and apologized, acknowledging that they couldn't imagine how I must feel. X recognized that they didn't deserve a chance for a conversation before any decisions were made, but suggested that time might help things calm down. X expressed understanding that my opinion of them was likely better than they deserved and proposed discussing counseling and personal matters through text or a call outside of work email. I responded, letting X know that I would be occupied with work in P's move, but would use their personal email for further communication on this matter. X thanked me and asked me to consider their words. They expressed concern for my well-being, acknowledging the loneliness I might be experiencing, and inquired about P's well-being during the move. X sent their love to P and apologized once again, urging me to call soon. I just realized that P, my parent, is losing everything they own, their home of 50-plus years in memories, since they're moving into a facility. How does a person with dementia feel being moved? How do they feel having to be reminded nearly every day because they forgot, then going through the emotions of it all over again? I've been trying to be as gentle as possible, but we're sorting through things to see what they really want. After contemplating the exchange more, the mention of not sending it to work stuck with me. Initially, I thought it made sense. Personal matters shouldn't mix with work email, but I'm pretty sure she must have been using her work phone for this. Her personal one is always clean, and I updated it for her new watch last Christmas. I guess I could have still missed it, though. Update, I found a better place to stay temporarily with a friend who lives close to work, and I've moved in for the time being. While I thought about renting an apartment right away, this arrangement works well for the short term. Now, on to the remaining events. I served her with divorce papers, but she responded contentiously through her attorney. Recently, I had to deal with a maintenance issue at my old home. Thankfully, it wasn't too damaging, but significant enough to require quick handling. When I arrived to deal with it, fortunately, I thought she wasn't around. I met with the contractor, handled the issue, and aimed to be out before she returned. It took several hours, but I managed to move things around and fix the problem. Of course, my luck couldn't be that good. Later that day, I received a call from a doctor saying she had been admitted to the hospital. I'm still her emergency contact and husband, so it wasn't a real surprise. Before I arrived, she had called an ambulance thinking she was having a heart attack. It turned out to be a panic attack, but she told them she had constant self-harming thoughts and was admitted for observation. She's been in there since, so I had to inform her boss about her medical leave. After talking to the doctor, I decided to go and see her. Her doctor said I could visit, but I needed to be non-confrontational since she was in a delicate state. I was conflicted about it, thinking it might be standard cheater script BS. Despite my feelings, I still care for her and don't want her to harm herself or struggle in the future. Despite my feelings, I still care for her and don't want her to harm herself or struggle in the future. In the past, she has been in care for mental health due to unrelated issues, along with another chronic health problem she's dealt with throughout her life. During that time, I was fully present, doing everything I could to help her. Also, selfishly, I don't want this situation to impact her ability to handle our joint affairs. I discussed it with my friend, who said it's up to me what to do about visiting her. I also spoke with my attorney. After the initial visits, they advised me to be cautious, don't make promises, or say anything that could be used against me, etc. I knew before visiting that cheaters often use the threat of self-harm as a manipulation tactic. However, given her history, I'm also aware that this might genuinely be a serious situation for her. I get it. I shouldn't let anything tied to her actions hinder my progress and moving forward with my life. But there's a part of me that feels the need to be there for her. It's frustrating to have these feelings while still wishing none of this had happened, but it did. I feel like I've been firm with her, but seeing her in such a state might set me back. Before you criticize me, I can't just abandon her. It's not in my nature. She really has no one else. Her only real friend lives far away and is dealing with her own serious medical condition. So I informed her doctor that I would visit her in the hospital and did so the following day. When I got there, she was a mess. I brought some things she might need, thinking she would likely be there for at least a few days. She was still sleeping when I arrived, hooked up to an IV and various monitors. None of them seemed related to mental health, but I figured maybe dehydration or something. But all I could think about was how I had seen her sleep so many times, looking beautiful and peaceful, the person I wanted. As I sat there watching her, she started to wake up, and all the feelings of anger and betrayal started to come back. But I held it together. When she finally woke up, she was surprised to see me. She begged me for a hug and forgiveness. I said I was there to make sure she was okay, expressing my worry. I made it clear that I wasn't there to talk about us. We were civil, but there were lots of tears on her side. We talked for a long time. Then she hit me with another bombshell. During her visit to the gynecologist for STD tests and a checkup, they found something still being assessed. Oh boy, I thought, here we go. This crazy situation where she caught an STD and I was going to hear about it. Or maybe not. Fortunately, that wasn't the case. She was found to have fairly aggressive ovarian cancer. Now, I'm no expert, but I know that. Usually, that type of cancer doesn't show obvious symptoms until it's advanced. I had to step out of the room to gather myself for a minute. I had all these emotions going through me and didn't want her to see them. I composed myself and went back in. We talked for a long time. In our talk, I eventually agreed to help her however I can, though part of me wanted to tell her to rely on her boyfriend now. I made it clear that it had nothing to do with us being together. I believe she would do the same for me if the situation were reversed, but who knows? Her panic attack, it turns out, was the result of getting this news, her birthday, which I totally ignored, and getting served all in the same week. It's like the perfect storm hitting her life. Maybe too much karma. She was just feeling like ending her life would be easier than fighting me, this disease, and being alone, etc. Losing everything, and now losing her life on top of it. She also didn't want me to somehow end up bankrupt from her likely medical debt. Her life insurance and giving me the house totally free now would make for a nest egg I could totally start over with. But ultimately, I convinced her that her being around and fighting this with everything possible is the only thing I want for and from her. I made it clear that I am not a reason for her to end herself, etc. So this is what I've been up to lately. Crisscrossing highways for work, visiting my parent, the hospital, my friend's place, and now back to my old home for more of her belongings. She's been moved to a regular room since her doctors believe she's no longer a danger to herself. More tests have been conducted, and today we're expecting precise results on the stage of her condition. Preliminary exams suggest at least stage 2B or higher. If there's a chance it's not stage 4, we might manage, but if it is, we're looking at a shortened but tough outcome. I'm writing this in the hospital cafeteria, waiting for the oncology department to provide more results and details. I'm the type to do anything for anyone. If her actions hadn't pushed me away, I'd be a wreck, not that I haven't been in private. Once again, I'm being the strong one for both of us, attempting to stay optimistic, which goes against my natural pessimism. The most significant development, if there's hope, involves major emergency surgery and chemo, followed by a period of care. I've committed to being there for her through surgery, chemo, and recovery in the best-case scenario. I haven't explicitly said I'd move in and stay with her, though that might be necessary. My stance on divorce hasn't changed. I've consulted my lawyer about the legal implications and whether we can still be considered separated. They say we can consider this an in-house separation given certain conditions. My other concern is avoiding part of her medical debt, which is likely to delay our proceedings. They mentioned amending our settlement agreement, but she would need to agree that none of this is my liability. So, is there a chance I can care for her through this, avoid emotional reconnection, and still move on with my life, regardless of how this unfolds? Update for those still interested, I finally met with the doctors. It's stage 2 billions, and it has spread, but the tumors are still small and haven't reached the bladder or other distant organs like the liver, which, from my understanding, is nearly impossible to cure. She'll undergo serious surgeries and chemo. I had already made up my mind to support her in her battle, regardless of her actions. I won't leave her to face this alone. Some might say it's not my responsibility anymore, but I can't be that tough person I thought I could initially, or what some folks here suggest. Well, I'm too old to care what people think. I'm doing it for myself. I'll continue with the separation and divorce. Unfortunately, I'll probably move back in for an in-house separation to assist her for a while. I've discussed the plan with my attorney. They understand my position and say we can still consider any time I'm there as separated as long as we don't share a bed, which isn't a problem for various reasons. We also need an agreement that she won't make the process more difficult, as it seemed to be her original plan. I'll ensure she understands that a condition of my support is that she doesn't contest or drag out the process. However, I'll agree to give her time to get better situated. I confess I'll feel guilty, as if I'm bargaining with her life. But I guess we all have our limits. She'll undergo surgery in the next few days for additional biopsies and a major operation. The treatment plan is aggressive, but it's better to stop the spread now. I guess I don't need more details than that. In all likelihood, as my post title states, her cheating may have saved her life, as she would likely have discovered this too late otherwise. So, I suppose someone in this situation gets a win. Update. I've been in the hospital with my wife since yesterday morning, and it's been just as awful as everything else that's been happening. Firstly, she's in critical condition. During surgery, they had to stop due to uncontrollable blood pressure. The surgeon removed a significant amount of cancer, but not all of it. Further surgery is too risky at this point. Last night, she had a seizure, causing additional damage and bleeding, leading to another surgery, despite it not being advised earlier to stop internal bleeding. She got out of that surgery earlier this morning, but has been in and out of consciousness. They're doing everything possible to prevent her from having a stroke. I'm not sure if she'll make it, but I've been without sleep for 2 days, imagining the worst. She's a bit more stable, but it's still a delicate situation. Additionally, while waiting for her initial surgery, I used her work phone and saw a message from her affair partner. It was from a few weeks ago, from an unrecognized number. Although she had his other number blocked, she kept their conversation. He was apologizing for how he treated her the last time they met. There's a whole story there that I won't go into, but it happened because I tracked him down, almost doing something foolish and dangerous. He reached out to her and she bargained to meet with him to avoid legal trouble. This was almost a month ago. Anyway, I saw her response, that he was the biggest mistake of her life. She said she hated herself for meeting him and would never be in touch or see him again. For everyone's safety, she asked him not to contact her again. I don't take this as anything since I found it, not something she admitted to me, so I guess she still has her secrets. Although I went through everything, including her work emails and personal accounts, and looked back before last year, I found nothing suspicious before then. Again, it doesn't change my mind about divorce or helping her. I guess I'm just ranting since everything is messed up right now. Whether she lives or dies, she may never know that I know this. It only proves to me that she's still capable of lying to me. I don't even know if we'll ever have the chance to talk about it. At this point, it doesn't really matter. So, either way, I may be done with my post since nothing else matters if she's not alive, has some brain damage, or is in a worse state than expected. I'll still do what I can for her and hope for the best, but naturally, I expect the worst. The best I can hope for is to get some actual sleep before the weekend. Update: here's the latest update on my challenging situation. My wife's condition has been fluctuating, mostly for the worse. The medical team suspects she had a small stroke, but she's holding on and showing slight improvement over the weekend. While she's not out of the woods, doctors are a bit more hopeful. She's been conscious more, experiencing a lot of pain and on strong medications. They moved her from intensive care, and she'll likely go into rehab before returning home on Thursday. My wife's best friend, M, reached out to me. We hadn't spoken since this ordeal began, and I assumed she knew and was supporting my wife. I left her a voicemail the night after my wife's first surgery, just in case they hadn't talked, informing her about the critical situation. I suggested that if she wanted to see my wife, she should do so soon in case the worst happened. Although M and I weren't very close, she and my wife had been friends since their teens and went to college together. We spent time together on holidays and a couple of vacations. M called on Thursday, expressing sympathy for what we were going through and asking to visit my wife. She also inquired if she could stay at the house, possibly thinking I still lived there. I agreed, even though staying in my own house part-time still causes me pain. M is a genuinely good person, and I knew losing her friend was weighing on her. I picked her up from the airport Thursday evening and we went straight to the hospital. During the drive, we discussed my wife's condition and everything that happened since the surgery. M finally revealed that she knew about our situation. She mentioned that my wife had only told her everything a few days before being initially hospitalized. When she received the news about cancer and being served, they hadn't talked much last year, not like before. M thought it was because my wife struggled with the news about M's own medical struggles and wasn't good at potentially losing her best friend. The kicker was that M had shared her suspicions about her husband cheating with my wife. They were working through it, but M believed it was just emotional, thinking he had a crush on someone at work but didn't pursue it. She advised my wife on how to handle the situation, marriage counseling, set boundaries, and demand the respect she deserved. M shared how they had argued a lot. When she told my wife she wasn't sure they could still be friends after knowing how deceitful my wife was to both her and me. M even cursed my wife out, saying she deserved the consequences in the divorce. This was surprising because M is not someone who usually curses. She's pretty religious and straight-laced. M mentioned that my wife had called her a few times after, but she had ignored the calls. She thought I was trying to involve her more. When she heard my message, she knew she couldn't go without seeing my wife again if the worst happened, and didn't want it to be their last words. So she called me to come visit. We spent a lot of time together this weekend, not in any inappropriate way, but she shared more insights. After visiting my wife, we talked almost every night until very late. It was nice because she never pressured me to stay together. After each visit, she seemed more lenient. On her last night, she surprised me by revealing that my wife had asked her to discuss DNR, do not resuscitate, and other end-of-life matters with me. My wife wasn't sure if, in the worst-case scenario, I could take her off life support if her condition worsened. She expressed a desire to end her life to avoid more suffering or living with severe disabilities. My wife asked M to convince me to let her go if the time came and I reached out or couldn't cope with the outcome. I plan to talk to her about this tonight, but am uncertain about what to say. Personally, I don't believe in keeping people alive if they are suffering, and I might do the right thing in the appropriate circumstance. However, I can't commit to anything beyond that, and I worry I might be influenced by my own desire to be done with this, even in the right medical scenario. I think I would carry a lot of guilt forever. I'll also discuss this with my therapist, though my appointment isn't until later in the week. I asked her friend M if she would consider assuming medical power of attorney (POA) over my wife before she left, and she is thinking about it. I will also approach one of my close relatives, though they live far away, and I can't guarantee their involvement. I'm adamant about making only legal decisions. I briefly talked to my lawyer, and we have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow. However, tonight I will tell my wife that I understand her wishes, but I can't agree to them at this time.
Let's start with D-Day, in the spring of 2017, when my wife and I were around 30 years old and had been together since our college days. We also had a child in elementary school. Initially, I suspected my wife of having an affair, but when I expressed my concerns, she immediately denied it. Over time, my fears were confirmed, and I confronted her with evidence. Despite her persistent denial, she eventually confessed, crying and asking for forgiveness. At that point, I felt like demanding her immediate departure and starting the divorce process. It's crucial to share how the events leading to the revelation of her infidelity unfolded. Even though it didn't involve physical closeness, plans for an faithful meeting were already in place. A few months before that crucial day, I noticed my wife using her phone more cautiously. She would turn away when using it and quickly put it away when I entered the room. She even took it to the bath or shower, which seemed strange, but I didn't think much of it at first. One incident caught my attention. We used to freely share our phones, but the day I wanted her number to find a new restaurant, something seemed off. I suggested going to a new restaurant, but my phone was charging. Curiosity got the better of me, and I asked for her phone number. When she asked why, I explained, but she held onto her phone while showing me the menu. This, along with other behaviors, raised my suspicions. After pondering for days, I finally asked her directly if something was going on with someone else. She reassured me, citing a friend's personal issue and the need for privacy. Despite her reassurances, an uneasy feeling persisted. Despite my efforts, the discomfort lingered, suggesting more to the situation. The suspicious behavior appeared to stop, or so I thought. Then a significant incident occurred, further confirming my suspicions. Approaching this delicately, one afternoon during an unfaithful moment, she reached for her phone, expressing a desire to record the process on video. This was unusual as she usually felt insecure around cameras. Curiosity got the better of me, and I asked about the purpose. A little embarrassed, she said she wanted to observe herself. Seeing this new adventurous side, I agreed. She set up a camera, filming herself on a selfie camera, capturing every detail of her intense engagement. I was pleasantly surprised by her active participation, as she usually did this only at my request. But this time she readily agreed without taking her eyes off the camera, radiating captivating enthusiasm. The handsome sounds she made added to the intensity of the situation and captivated me. When the performance reached its peak, she went further, showcasing the achievement in front of the camera. I regret acknowledging the future importance of this video, but it's definitely significant. Despite the clear deviation from our usual behavior, I chose not to make a big deal out of it, not wanting to embarrass or discourage her from trying new things. Instead, I tried to keep things normal, secretly hoping we could explore this new experience together. Since my wife and I have been in a committed relationship since age 20, her sudden change in character triggered a familiar, instinctive feeling in me. A few weeks after the video incident, I decided to check her phone for suspicious messages or photos, but found nothing unusual. Later, I remembered we used the backup function together, saving pictures automatically to Google Photos. Realizing this, I logged into my laptop, using her credentials for further investigation. When checking her email, everything seemed normal until I found a large collection of candid photos and videos taken by her about 4 months ago. They weren't meant for me, and she had deleted them from her phone, but forgot to delete them from the backup. Curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to continue searching by opening the video camera on her phone and scrolling through the discovered content before talking to her. I chose to rewrite this material in case she remembers and erases it. I kept this information for several days, trying to handle it with understanding and considering possible explanations for its presence. At that time, OnlyFans wasn't popular, so I initially thought she might post explicit materials online, but that would be out of character for her. I emphasized that she's always been reserved. I couldn't imagine how this could be explained other than a romantic relationship with someone else. Again, I expressed my suspicions to her, mentioning something was off, but refrained from revealing the facts I discovered, hoping for an explanation that would dispel my doubts. In response, she seemed slightly offended, reminding us that we already discussed this issue and denying any relationship with another man. There was no admission of guilt. I asked her again if she needed to share something or speak out, and again she refused. Before this conversation, I got access to her Google account again, so I presented her with all the information I gathered and demanded an explanation about the contents of her Google account. Her initial reaction was surprised, but she quickly composed herself. She accused me of ruining an unexpected anniversary gift she had planned for me. Knowing that we both travel a lot, she wanted to give me something interesting for our time apart, but I remained skeptical and decided to play a bluff. I told her I had access not only to her Google account, hoping this would make her confess the truth on my ultimatum to leave if she didn't. She couldn't hold back her tears and insisted everything was not as it seemed. Apologizing, she asked for forgiveness. She claimed she did nothing wrong, but only acted stupidly. When I asked about the person she mentioned, she called him her colleague. They first met at a work event at the end of 2016, about 7 months before this important event. Interestingly, he holds a similar position in another branch of the same company, located about 200 miles away from us. Initially, they communicated by email, mainly about work. After exchanging numbers, she emphasized that, given his extensive experience in this position, her only intention was to get professional advice and share tips. It was her recent promotion to a similar position that triggered more personal topics in their conversation, and he began to flirt, to which she willingly reciprocated. Realizing the need for privacy, he suggested moving their communication to an encrypted messaging app. From my perspective, this man seemed to have a tendency to pursue married women, which was unpleasant to me. The initial messages were deleted, so I never saw them, but the rest of their conversation was saved in the messaging app they used. When I said I wanted to watch, she resisted and tried to talk me out of it emotionally. At the same time, I reminded her that I was ready to leave if she wasn't completely honest with me. Eventually, she reluctantly opened the app and handed it to me, curling up with her head in her lap. The content of the messages was explicit, filled with provocative photos and videos. Both participants were excited about an upcoming summer work event where they planned to spend 2 nights in a hotel, detailing shockingly graphic messages about what they intended to do. Continuing to read, my thoughts went back to the earlier video. I asked if she had sent him the video, and in response, she burst into tears. Trying to gather more information, I scrolled through the conversation until I found a video. To my horror, they were exchanging numerous notes discussing him. He expressed pleasure from indulging in pleasure while watching the video, and she replied that it turns her on. This revelation deeply offended me. It wasn't just about sharing a faithful video, but also emotional betrayal. Participating in such a vulnerable action was completely unfamiliar to me. Let me clarify that I've never shared explicit photos, let alone sent them. The idea of sharing such an unfaithful picture, especially with someone she was involved with, terrified me. However, they managed to involve me in their past relationships, even though I never willingly participated. Maybe not intentionally, but it seemed so. Now, thinking about it, I realize with deep regret that I was just her replacement and an equal participant in that video. I realized that all those worries and experiences I expected were directed solely for his benefit, not mine. So I made the difficult decision to leave and informed her about my desire to divorce. Despite her moving out, she insisted on reconciling. To get a grip on the situation, I consulted with several divorce lawyers who informed me that a settlement agreement would inevitably lead to a significant decrease in my financial well-being and joint custody of our child. After carefully studying my financial capabilities and having numerous conversations with my parents, I came to this conclusion. Turning to my colleague for advice and trusting my friends, I concluded that divorce is the most appropriate option. I believed that I could overcome financial difficulties reasonably soon, allowing me to retire as planned. Additionally, I believed that my daughter's well-being would be better if she had contented parents, even if they were no longer married. When I finally reached out to my wife to tell her about my decision to start divorce proceedings, she surprised me by offering a deal. She suggested a year-long trial separation, during which we would have time to cool down and restore the relationship. After seeking advice from a marriage counselor, I reconsidered the situation. If I chose to move on, the consultant would be ready to facilitate the divorce process, providing equal custody of the child and a more favorable distribution of property. After careful consideration, I agreed to this decision. I made it clear to my wife that I intended to approach our separation as if I were single. Given the length of our relationship and my limited experience when we first started dating, I felt that I needed to gain more life experience to make an informed decision about our future. I expressed my dissatisfaction with her behavior and made it clear that if she considered it unfair or felt uncomfortable in such an unequal position, then we could think about divorce. Although it was unpleasant for her, she understood my point of view and eventually agreed. Soon after, I started dating other women, including a romantic relationship with a woman I met at the gym that lasted several months. It seems that my wife doubted the sincerity of our relationship. She didn't handle the situation properly. During our first marriage consultation, we introduced ourselves and discussed our circumstances. The marriage counselor asked about my dating status, to which I replied affirmatively. In response, my wife made the following remark: "I don't see the point in us going through this if you're dating other women." After the session, I agreed with her opinion and expressed the belief that marriage counseling might not be a useful idea. She subsequently apologized and retracted her words. I told her we could revisit the idea later. Over the next few months, she periodically, often late at night, sent me messages asking why I had treated her this way and whether I had not punished her properly. After about a year and a half, I began to consider the possibility of reconciliation. We successfully engaged in co-parenting and spent time with our daughter as one family. Besides, the dates were incredibly dull. Perhaps it was premature, but disappointment overwhelmed me. After numerous dates and even second and third dates, I realized that I couldn't imagine anything more than casual relationships with the women I dated. As a result, having been divorced for more than a year, I decided to end my dating. This choice allowed me to spend more time reconnecting with my wife. In early 2019, I asked her to move in with us to rebuild our family, bringing great joy to my daughter. Our relationship restoration centered around our shared commitment to raising our child. As a mother, I trust her implicitly. She's excellent, and I have full confidence in her ability to make sensible financial and medical decisions on my behalf if needed. However, our romantic love hasn't rekindled, and unfortunately, I no longer feel a deep sense of gratitude for having her in my life. While some aspects of our relationship aren't ideal, it doesn't diminish my overall happiness. I've held on to hope for a long time, but it's been over 4 years since our reconciliation, and it seems things won't get much better. Nevertheless, I'm content fulfilling the roles of a responsible partner and devoted father daily. This used to suit me well, but recent events brought discord into our relationship, leaving me feeling depressed and lost after the betrayal. I'm really counting on the support of others. My best friend and I have been inseparable since our teenage years, attending all significant events together, from proms to weddings and even the birth of our children. Despite the busy life, we managed to find time for joint sports several times a week. During the tough times of separation from my wife, he provided support, checking on me daily and ensuring I took care of myself. He even monitored my drinks intake. I tried not to succumb to excessive drinking and to keep my composure until I regained stability in my life. But after I took over the organization of Thanksgiving last year, the situation began to change. He became distant, often canceled our classes at the gym, and generally avoided communication. At first, I attributed this behavior to being busy during the holiday season, given the family and work responsibilities that usually consume all of us at this time. From time to time, I contacted him by SMS to find out how he was doing, but his answers usually came down to short messages or a simple thumbs-up emoji. I didn't attach much importance to this. Perhaps he just needed personal space. I tried to communicate with him and convince him of my sincere care and support. But in January, my wife confronted me with the fact that I had not informed her about the divorce of my closest friend and his wife. I was completely unaware of the situation she was talking about. As it turned out, my friend's wife turned to my wife with a request to help her overcome infidelity and convince her of the need to work on their marriage. In response, my wife just offered her typical advice. She stressed the importance of qualities such as transparency, patience, and respect, and even advised me to read something. But I was struck by his reaction to someone else's situation. Despite the obvious irony in her answer, I refrained from expressing my thoughts. It was very sad for me to watch the pain they caused. Like everyone else, I knew about the difficulties they faced and could not understand why they did not turn to me for support. After all, this man gave me incredible support during my wife's infidelity, and I thought he should have known that I would never condemn him. Driven by my anxiety, I started reaching out to him, inviting him to the gym or for a drink, hoping to find solace. We were engaged, for example, in a game of disc golf, but it took a long time to persuade him. When we met, his attitude towards me was far from warm. He seemed terse and unfriendly, but as we talked, he gradually began to tell his story. He said that at some point, his wife told him that they should live separately, as I did. She even suggested that extramarital affairs are common in many marriages. His wife's disbelief in his fidelity led to the fact that he began to think about divorce. It was obvious that he partially blamed me for the current situation. The pain inflicted on me was as sharp as a blade. The mere thought that I had played some role, even the most insignificant, in the cruel fate of my friend's betrayal, caused almost as much pain as the discovery of my wife's infidelity. Did my decision to stay with my wife somehow affect this outcome? Does forgiving infidelity mean that it becomes more tolerable? Is there anything I can do to help my friend? I tried to explain why I decided to stay, emphasizing that our relationship had become purely practical. Our marriage no longer resembled what it was before. However, his indifference didn't confuse me. I believe he has every right to be angry, and I sympathize with him. The recent incident reopened old emotional wounds, significantly worsening my relationship with my wife. It's been 2 months since our last faithful moment, and even making eye contact or engaging in physical touch has become challenging for me. The thought of divorce has started crossing my mind again, but fortunately, my daughter is grown up now and can handle the potential consequences. I think she's reached an age where she can express her wishes and opinions about our family situation. I have complete confidence in my wife's ability to be a great co-parent, irrespective of our relationship status. I feel a strong sense of guilt and depression about how much we've regressed, and I'm somewhat disgusted by my own actions. Have any of you ever felt this overwhelming sense of guilt, especially at such an advanced stage? How did you cope with it? Logically, I understand I'm not to blame, but his criticism puts a lot of pressure on my conscience. I can't support him the way he once supported me. I'm genuinely at a loss about what to do. Any advice or words of support would be greatly appreciated. I can't help but wonder if cheating has permanently damaged the part of me seeking connection and closeness. After our conversation, I felt emptiness and the absence of any real essence. I remember lying in bed one weekend, contemplating the lack of emotions I should be feeling. Despite being with an amazing woman, experiencing a tender and charming moment, an inexplicable emptiness prevailed within me. I longed for the deep connection and closeness my wife and I once had, but it never surfaced. This inability to feel burdened me with guilt and deep self-doubt. When my wife and I reconciled, I hoped to regain the deep satisfaction and connection we once shared. Despite the physical aspect being enjoyable, there's no true satisfaction in it. It feels like I'm just going through the motions and not experiencing a genuine connection with my wife. Since I last expressed my concerns, there has been some improvement in our relationship. We've had several conversations, and I must commend my wife for her insight and intelligence in understanding what was bothering me. I questioned why she felt entitled to condemn my friend's wife for behaving similarly to herself. She adamantly denied the similarity, claiming Mike's wife had repeatedly cheated while she had never done so. It was clear she had convinced herself she never intended to cheat with a third person. I reminded her of our previous conversations, to which she replied something like this: "I made a big mistake and allowed myself to get carried away by the moment, even though I had no intention of doing anything. She just doesn't get it, or maybe I don't understand it. On one hand, I recognize our situation could have been worse, but on the other, the guilt still weighs on me. At least we're communicating now." Some people suggested psychotherapy, but we never went to marriage counseling after the first session. However, my wife attended individual therapy sessions during our separation. My family has faced challenges with mental health treatment, and my grandmother's mistreatment by mental health professionals during a less understanding era left a lasting impact on our perception. This has become a significant obstacle for me in seeking help for myself, and I'm unsure how to overcome it. Regarding Mike, I decided to give him the space, as you all recommended. I reached out to him through text, expressing my support, apologizing for his current difficulties, and assuring him of my presence and support. In response, he gave me a thumbs up, indicating he needed my help. I can't help but feel sorry for him and would like to offer support. I'm grateful to all of you for being an umbrella for me, because I can't share these things with anyone in my life. They either condemn me or condemn my wife, which isn't good for anyone. I would greatly appreciate any advice or words of support. On another note, tonight was an unexpected development. For the first time since the new year and the incident with Mike and his wife, after finishing work, she drank several glasses of wine. From the start, she exuded undeniable beauty that has always captivated me. Lately, my desire for physical release has been increasing rapidly. Complicating matters, her infidelity revealed that I'm not an integral part of her past life. Perhaps I'm just a preference, not an absolute necessity, meaning if I can't satisfy her desires, someone else undoubtedly will. There was no tenderness or closeness in this meeting, just dark, desperate, and even primal energy. As soon as she reached the end, the immediate desire was to take a shower, which I did. Unfortunately, her feelings were hurt, and they would have been hurt even more if I had rejected her. I'm not sure this outcome can be considered a victory for me. I apologize for clouding the mood, but I am deeply disappointed in myself and our situation now. Sharing my thoughts here brings me some comfort. Growing up, my father instilled in me that a man should silently cope with his problems and fulfill his duties, as no one cares about our emotional well-being. We are valued only for our usefulness. Perhaps it's not surprising he passed away at such a young age. After the incident I described, an awkward tension lingered in our family. To avoid this discomfort, I intentionally kept my presence to a minimum, thanks to my daily routine, including work and gym classes. Additionally, my daughter and I found solace in our shared passion for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, spending a significant amount of time together in the gym, where events were held every evening, on weekdays, and Sunday afternoons. In early February, news of my mother's sister's pass away reached us. She lived in a neighboring state and left behind cherished family photos, looms, and personal belongings important to my mother. Without hesitation, I offered to make the trip to pick up these valuable items. The agreement was made about 3 weeks ago, and my wayward wife and I were planning to make the trip together last weekend. On Friday, as we were getting ready for work, I reminded her of our plans for the Sunday trip and volunteered to go alone, despite the long journey of over 4 hours each way. Even though I assured her I could handle it, I brought up my past experience with such a trip. She expressed a desire to go, but I convinced her everything was fine and suggested she probably had more interesting ways to spend Sunday. Yet, she insisted on accompanying me and said she didn't mind coming along. I stressed that I wanted her to join me, but emphasized it was ultimately her decision whether to stay home or join the trip. In response, I made it clear I wanted her to come with me. I didn't want her to go, not because I didn't want her to, but because I understood it would be an unpleasant experience for her. So, on Sunday morning, I woke up early, ensuring my mother could take care of our daughter for the whole day. Once everything was settled, I returned home for my wife, ready to hit the road. The first hour of the ride passed in silence, as she had just woken up and doesn't like to talk in the morning. Eventually, we stopped for breakfast, refreshed ourselves with some coffee, and began a conversation mostly about our daughter and work. Then, the conversation took an unexpected turn. It was casual, consisting of small talk, and nothing extraordinary. Suddenly, she inquired about Mike's well-being. Not being aware of his current situation, I admitted my ignorance, which puzzled her, given our close friendship. I explained that I hadn't met with him since our last get-together for drinks a few months ago. Perplexed, she asked if there was any specific incident causing our separation. I clarified that it was simply both of us being busy with our lives, making communication difficult. Despite my efforts to shift the conversation, she refused to back down. She started criticizing me, stating that I didn't support a friend and expressing disappointment about my absence during his tough times. She insisted that his difficulties stemmed from his wife's infidelity and the upcoming divorce. Though I sensed tension rising, I managed to contain it. Instead, I calmly told her I no longer wanted to continue the conversation and drowned out her words by playing my music podcast. Deep down, I knew this conversation was unavoidable and had to happen. I've always been better at expressing my thoughts in writing than speaking off the cuff. To prepare for this conversation, I actively participated in online discussions, which proved helpful. Additionally, I maintain a diary where I jot down questions I need answers to and articulate my thoughts for the audience. Despite my stubbornness, the invaluable advice I've received from everyone here has genuinely influenced me. Without hesitation, I decided to lower the stereo system's volume. I shared my meeting with Mike, explaining that his wife, like me, encouraged him to live separately. I emphasized that infidelity unfortunately became common in marriage, leading him to think his reaction was exaggerated. I conveyed that there was some truth in his wife's viewpoint, suggesting that staying with a cheater unwittingly normalizes betrayal. Furthermore, I opined that it would be crucial for his wife to witness the consequences my wife faced after losing her marriage. Perhaps she wouldn't have taken the action she did. I also mentioned that Mike's divorce and our conversation brought back painful memories, making me reflect on her infidelity and our marriage. She reacted with anger and defensiveness, criticizing Mike and objecting again to me calling her relationship with a colleague treason. Trying to avoid a difficult discussion, I advised her to disregard this issue, expressing regret for bringing it up and suggesting we focus on the beauty of trees and flowers. In response, I turned on the radio again, and we endured about 30 minutes of awkward silence. Eventually, she seemed to calm down, apologized, and expressed a desire to talk. Reluctantly, I agreed, allowing her to continue the conversation. Her first question was whether I still loved her, and I honestly admitted that I was not sure. She claimed to know about my feelings for her. Curious, I asked how she could be sure when I couldn't figure it out myself. She said that love is an action, not just a feeling. She feels my love because I am devoted to our family. I am a devoted father, faithfully fulfilling my duties every day, even receiving her during our separation. Even in the toughest times, she trusted me infinitely. When she needed me, she knew she could rely on me without hesitation. Being next to me, she felt confident for herself and our daughter. She believed that all my actions stemmed from love, and if she felt I loved her, she considered it genuine affection. She asked if I believed she loved me, and I confidently replied that I knew what she loved. I admitted that her life would probably be easier if she decided to leave, and love would be the driving force behind her decision. I wondered why she chose to stay despite putting our family at risk during the betrayal. I couldn't understand how she could claim to love me and still behave that way. I expressed my doubts, suggesting that something might be lacking in me, making her seek connections with another person. I was puzzled why she never raised these issues with me, stressing that she should have ended the relationship, not changed. This upset her, and she emphatically stated that leaving had not even been considered by her. She loved me very much, but I couldn't grasp how consistent and logical her words were. I wondered why she would enter a relationship with another man if she wasn't dissatisfied. I questioned if I hadn't given her enough attention to make her feel wanted and loved. Though she assured me I did nothing wrong, she admitted that in our long-term relationship, she began taking these aspects for granted. In this situation, I might have done these actions for her out of a sense of duty or obligation. She also expressed uncertainty about our relationship, mentioning that she always noticed attention from other women. It made her feel inferior, as if she didn't have a special place in my life. She believed that without her presence, I would have had many alternatives. This fact attracted her to a partner much older than us, short and bald, with a big belly, completely opposite to me in appearance. She mentioned seeing photos of his wife, an average middle-aged woman, normal but not particularly attractive compared to her. My wife, younger and more attractive, felt she had a special place in his heart. Thanks to his undivided attention, she felt incredibly confident and valuable. She found great pleasure in the intense, almost obsessive desire he felt for her. She understood she was the only one causing such strong emotions in him. It had an intoxicating effect on her, almost like a potent substance. My curiosity got the best of me, and I asked if she had any suspicions about my loyalty. Surprisingly, she firmly denied any concerns, trusting my loyalty and devotion, believing I wouldn't betray her. However, when I dated other women during our breakup, her perception drastically changed, leading to a violent reaction. I questioned why I wasn't deserving of the same loyalty. She insisted she was loyal and devoted, stressing she would never change, but I reminded her of messages planning a physical relationship during a company event. To my surprise, she dismissed it, claiming to boost his ego, and the company wouldn't send her this year. She did it to support his faith and ensure a constant flow of attention. Curious, I asked if she was attracted to him. She grinned and denied it. Expressing my confusion, I explained her statement seemed contradictory. In response, she compared her SMS relationship to the man's use of explicit content to boost energy levels. There's enthusiasm and anticipation around her and his partner, indicating a strong bond, but it doesn't mean a lack of love. This contrasts with someone discussing their love partner, feeling cheerful and inspired by attention. As a result, her connection with me became even more pleasant. This made me reflect on how intense our relationship was. Before day, she talked about her feelings with great enthusiasm. According to her, this connection played a crucial role in boosting her self-esteem. She made it clear that her relationship with him had nothing to do with these feelings. It became obvious that these were the very problems she diligently addressed in therapy. However, I've never turned to a therapist because it's always been a difficult topic for me. Mental health problems were common in my father's family, who suffered from serious illnesses. Despite his condition, he managed to function well most of the time, experiencing occasional bouts of delirium. In contrast, his mother's condition was much more severe, leading to repeated placements in psychiatric clinics. Witnessing how his mother was subjected to extremely cruel and inadequate care, my father developed a distrust of mental health professionals. As a child of a father who feared doctors and hospitals, I also developed a deep-rooted distrust of mental health professionals. The constant worry that my father would be suddenly separated from his family during bouts of illness filled me with anxiety. Fortunately, I managed to avoid the same problems that my father and grandmother had. Having passed the age when symptoms usually appear, I became more inclined to ignore emerging signs. I decided to abandon the idea of marriage counseling after one meeting with 2 psychotherapists left me extremely uncomfortable. Now, I don't know how to overcome the emotional burden I carry. Perhaps therapy could be beneficial, but I'm afraid my spouse can only share what's beneficial to her. It's a dilemma. When we arrived at our destination, we started packing my aunt's belongings. Spending time with my uncle has become a routine, but there's always a strange feeling when sorting out someone's things after they pass away. The first time I felt this was when my father passed away. It struck me that all their possessions remained, but they were no longer there. Their whole life fit into objects, many of which might seem insignificant to us, but were important to them. Unfortunately, we'll never grasp the reasons for their attachments. In a somber atmosphere, we returned home, reflecting on the challenging process of sorting out my aunt's things, going over our detailed conversation, feeling its weight, exhausted by the long day. We delved into our relationship and contemplated seeking marriage counseling. Despite my doubts, I promised her to seriously consider this idea. I'm unsure how to interpret the details of her affair and the person involved. Should I trust her story? And even if I do, will it bring me any comfort or upset me more? I'm not sure yet. Our conversation went deeper than before, and driving played a role, allowing us to open up without looking into each other's eyes. It was almost like being in a confession booth. Opening up about some problems seems more pleasant. Maybe this will help us move forward, whether it strengthens the marriage or leads to a breakup. Nevertheless, it's progress, and I find encouragement in the fact that we both persevered through the discomfort. I managed not to withdraw, a positive step. She overcame her defensive attitude, which had hindered our conversations in the past. I may have contributed to her tendency to downplay some issues. I'm not saying her act wasn't serious. It does jeopardize the relationship. However, in my view, Mike's wife's infidelity was much more severe. She had an affair with a mutual friend they spent time with, a friend her husband also considered close. Throughout the story, it was clear she repeatedly had an affair with her partner, even within their shared home and bed. Reflecting on it, I admitted that if my wife had shown even a fraction of such disrespect, I would have ended the relationship quickly. I firmly believe that if she had taken their relationship beyond the virtual space, I would have left without hesitation. This part of the conversation troubled me, but I commend my wife's courage for reporting the affair to HR, given the company policy against fraternization. I also informed the other person's spouse that I would take action if she didn't, stressing the importance of proper behavior to delay the divorce process. I'm not sure how much credit is due to her, but the unfaithful wife eventually quit her job after the situation became public. Otherwise, she might have faced dismissal, though it's doubtful considering her experience and professional mentor role. However, this would have caused complications and led to his dismissal. Apparently, the betrayed spouse also decided to divorce him, and my wife and I are working on preserving our family, gradually rebuilding our faithful and spiritual connections.
Reflecting on high school now feels like looking back at a distant past. I was just an ordinary teenager, grappling with identity, friendships, and the intensity of first love. My parents were supportive but often busy, which gave me plenty of time to ponder life's uncertainties. Being introspective was both a blessing and a curse, shaping my future in unexpected ways. In those years, I experienced my first deep crush, fixating on someone who seemed to represent all my dreams. I was infatuated with the head cheerleader, believing our feelings were mutual and that we were destined to be together. We were inseparable until one night in May, when I saw her with someone else, shattering my world. Devastated, I drove aimlessly, even briefly contemplating crashing into a tree, but I kept going, hoping my parents could offer some guidance. When I got home, my parents were out, and the loneliness hit hard. In a moment of despair, I even tried to access my dad's weapon safe, but it was locked. Now I realize how irrational my teenage mind was, overwhelmed by something that seems trivial today. I fell asleep waiting for my parents and woke up to a beautiful spring day, feeling a deep sense of shame. We talked for an hour, and I gained a new perspective on my worth. I never spoke to the girl again, ignoring her attempts to apologize. I didn't even ask for the expensive necklace I had given her. After a week, she showed up at my door, but my grandmother sent her away, telling her to move on because I had. Prom came and went. She went with the other guy. I don't know how their night turned out, but I suspect the sugar in his gas tank delayed their fun. That experience hardened me, making me more guarded in relationships. Years later, my wife, Emma, found a note in a used book I had bought online. Confused, I explained it was The Wrong Man, a book about the Sam Shepard trial, but the note led to an unexpected confrontation. Emma was upset, pushing a piece of notebook paper under my nose. The note was written in delicate, feminine handwriting. "Jeff, you need to divorce that witch you're married to before she drives you crazy enough to destroy her. I'll wait for you, but not forever. Your love, Daddy. P.S. We had fun one last time. I expect to see those divorce papers signed soon." I was shocked, struggling to understand. Could it be a prank? Emma was clearly angry. I spent the next half hour explaining that I bought the book online and hadn't looked through it yet. The note must have belonged to the previous owner. But what are the chances the owner's name was also Jeff? The timing was terrible. Last year, I made the mistake of getting too close to a female co-worker, Sharon Roberts. We flirted, and it escalated to dinner. Sharon even proposed to me, and I was tempted. My marriage with Emma was struggling. But I realized I loved Emma and needed to fix things at home. That night, I confessed to Emma that our marriage needed work. Admitting my near infidelity was a mistake, but after some rough weeks, I convinced her that she was the only one for me. She seemed to believe me, until she found that note. Adding to the tension, I'd been working late for the past 3 months, hoping for a promotion. I wanted to prove myself, especially since Emma's parents never thought I was good enough for her. But all that time away had become a sore point. Emma had also been spending more time with her mother, who never liked me. After a big fight about my work hours, I foolishly called her mother a witch, the same word used in the note. Things only got worse from there. I know some of you might be thinking, just give up, you've been caught. But I swear I'm innocent. I ended up sleeping on the couch that night, unable to convince Emma that the note wasn't mine. She locked our bedroom door. On Thursday, I told my boss I need to cut back on work hours. He understood, having gone through a divorce himself. I brought Emma flowers, and though she didn't throw them away, the coldness between us remained. By Friday night, things were still tense. Emma decided to spend the weekend at her parents' house. I asked her not to go, but she said she needed time to think. I bit my tongue, knowing that her mother's influence wouldn't help. I spent the weekend thinking about how to fix our marriage, taking long walks with our dog, Samson, and reflecting on how much I love Emma. On Saturday night, I texted her, "Would you consider counseling?" Her response was brief, "We'll talk when I get home Sunday night." Sunday passed, and that night I got another message. "Drank too much at dinner. We'll be home Monday." My frustration grew. I was innocent, and I knew a weekend at her mom's was a bad idea. On Monday morning, Emma came home just as I was about to leave for work. She gave me a half-hearted kiss and said, "We'll talk tonight," before rushing upstairs to get ready for work. I worked a full day but made sure to pick up Chinese takeout and have it ready by the time she got home. Our dinner was quiet, polite but not warm. After dinner, Emma broke the silence. "Jeff, I don't trust you, and that's not how I should feel about my husband. Mom thinks I should leave." I cut in. "Let's leave your mother out of this. This is about us." "I need space and time to think. I suggest you move into the spare bedroom until we figure things out." I hated the idea. How does sleeping in separate rooms help us solve our problems? What about counseling? Maybe, but not right now. Right now, I need time for myself. I couldn't help asking, does thinking for yourself include your mother? My mom only wants what's best for me. If I need to talk to her, I will. That was the end of our conversation. I moved into the spare room and spent the night wide awake. Thinking back, I met Emma while consulting for an NGO where she was interning. I had just graduated from Wharton and was working at a top accounting firm. I was assigned to the NGO to help with their computer systems, and everything went well. The NGO got a new server, and I met my future wife. Emma was about to start her senior year at Princeton, and we spent that summer dating. She was smart, confident, and had the looks of a model. Despite her upper-class background, she treated everyone kindly, from the clerks to the president. Physically, we were a good match, but socially, we came from different worlds. Emma was an only child from a wealthy family, while I was one of 4 kids in a middle-class home. My mom was a second-grade teacher, and my dad owned a mechanic shop. I graduated from Kent State and later earned an MBA from Wharton. I eventually took a job at TMG2 Engineering Inc., where I now work as a project manager in IT, leading a significant project to migrate our systems to the cloud. Tuesday morning, I woke up in the spare bedroom. After getting my bearings, I went downstairs to find coffee ready. Emma was upstairs showering, and though I briefly considered joining her, I decided to give her the space she wanted. I drank my coffee and then got ready for work in the guest bathroom. The strain between us continued all week. Emma was working long hours, so I threw myself into my project, which seemed to please my boss. On Friday, I texted Emma, "Can I take you out to dinner tonight? You pick the place?" 10 minutes later, she replied, "Going to my mom's, spending the weekend." Frustrated, I called her to reason with her. "How can we work on our marriage if you're not here?" "I told you I needed time," she replied calmly. "It's only been a week. You need to respect that." I tried to convince her to stay, but she wouldn't budge. She finally agreed to consider counseling. "Will I see you before you leave for Manhattan tonight?" "No, I'm already packed. I'll probably be back Monday night. I'll go straight to work from New York." So, it was another weekend alone with Samson. 2 more days to figure out how to fix what was broken. On Saturday, I had an idea. I called the used bookstore where I bought The Wrong Man and spoke to a salesperson. "Hi, I bought The Wrong Man from your store a few weeks ago, and inside was a romantic note from someone named Jeff. My wife found it and thinks I'm having an affair. I need to contact the original Jeff who owned the book." The salesperson laughed. "Man, what are the odds? A book called The Wrong Man owned by 2 guys named Jeff, and with a love note inside. Look, this isn't funny. My wife needs proof that I'm not the Jeff who got that note. Can you check your system to see if the previous owner is registered? We can track sellers if they have an account, but I can't give out their info. Could you at least contact him and ask him to call me?" "Sure, what's your name?" "Jeff," I replied. "As in the author?" he asked. "What author?" I was confused. He laughed again. "T. Jefferson Parker, the mystery writer." This conversation was ridiculous, but I had to clarify. "I'm Jeffrey Parker, not Jefferson, and there's no T in my name." I gave him my number and was surprised when my phone rang 20 minutes later. "My name is Jeff, and I hear you found a note meant for me. Is this some kind of blackmail?" "No, not at all. I bought The Wrong Man and found a note from a woman named Terry. I need you to tell my wife that the note was meant for you, not me." "The note was in a book? Damn, I've been looking for that note everywhere. If my wife found it, I'd be in big trouble. I can't believe it ended up in that book." "Jeff, I need you to help me out here." "No way. I dodged that bullet, and I'm not getting involved." He hung up. Frustrated, I took a few minutes to calm down and then called him back. "Jeff, it's Jeff. I've changed my mind. This is blackmail. If you don't send me a notarized statement saying Terry wrote that note to you, I'll send a copy to your wife. How does that sound?" "Man, that's cold." "Not as cold as it's been in my house since my wife found that note." Okay, I'll send the statement, but you promise it's over after that?" "Absolutely. Just get it notarized and send it to me." I gave him my address and waited. Emma and I became physically engaged 5 weeks into dating while working at an NGO, and by summer's end, we were exclusive. During her senior year, I frequently drove 60 miles to Princeton to see her, and we spent Thanksgiving at her parents' New York apartment. Her mother was cold, but I hoped to win her over. Emma spent winter break with my family, where she felt at home. Her parents likely thought our relationship was just a phase, expecting it to fade like her previous ones. By June, I proposed, and she accepted. Living in Philadelphia, close to her parents in Manhattan, was ideal. However, after we got engaged, her mother tried to break us up. Emma resisted, but her mother continued to undermine our marriage subtly, a problem I didn't fully grasp until much later. Her parents' attitudes complicated my decisions. Should I focus on my career to impress them or spend more time with Emma? It's a tough balance many young professionals face. When Emma returned from her parents' house on Monday, she was still distant. I decided to wait for an email from the other Jeff before talking to her, continuing to sleep in the guest room. Desperate, I did something I'd sworn off. I read her emails. While she showered, I copied them to an external drive. Reading them confirmed my fears. Her mother was trying to turn Emma against me. She encouraged Emma to move to New York and transfer to her company's office. There was also a message from a guy named Grant Martin about staying in touch. Despite our strained relationship, Emma's responses gave me hope. She expressed love for me and a desire to save our marriage, despite her mother's influence. Later that evening, I received a notarized letter from the other Jeff confirming he was the one who wrote the note in the book. When Emma came home, I had dinner ready. After eating, I handed her the letter, and her expression softened. She sat on my lap, kissed me, and said, "This makes me very happy, Jeff. Almost as happy as having you back in my arms." We talked about her feelings of being an accessory in her parents' lives, and she explained how her mother had recently tried to rebuild their relationship. Her mother even advised against starting a family, fearing it would ruin Emma's career just as she believed it had ruined her own. I was stunned. Emma had wanted to start a family last year, but now her mother was driving a wedge between us. When I questioned if there was someone else, Emma assured me she would never cheat. Still concerned about her spending weekends in New York, I suggested a getaway. But Emma declined, saying her mother had invited her to see The Merchant of Venice. Disappointed, I agreed to postpone our trip. By Thursday, I took a risky step. I sent fake emails to her mother and Grant Martin, designed to infect their computers with viruses that would give me access to their emails. It was a dangerous move, but I felt it was necessary. Looking back, our wedding, orchestrated by Lois Taylor, felt more like a show than a celebration. Despite her disapproval, she hosted a lavish affair. My family kept things simple, while the Taylors invited everyone they knew. The whole event felt like a farce. The first few years of our marriage were good, balanced between work and fun. Living in Philadelphia, away from her parents, gave us peace. We even talked about starting a family, beginning with getting a dog named Samson. However, just as we were ready for kids, things began to unravel. By Thursday night, both Grant and Lois had opened the fake emails, and I gained access to their correspondence. What I discovered was shocking. Grant was having an affair with Emma's mother, and they were planning to set him up with Emma. Despite this, I decided to confront the situation directly. After arranging for Samson to stay at a kennel, I took the Amtrak to Manhattan, determined to save my marriage. By the time I arrived, I had a plan. I bought a Yankees cap, a cheap camera, and staked out her parents' house. While waiting, a woman approached, noticing my obvious surveillance. She offered to help, revealing herself as a private investigator. Surprised by her offer, I agreed to pay her for photos of Emma and Grant if they met. What started as a simple stakeout had turned into something far more complex. Her words stung, but she continued. "This neighborhood is full of wealthy people with shady morals. I'm here all night, watching the building next door, waiting for a lawyer to sneak out with his mistress. His wife hired me to get evidence." She extended her hand. "I'm Karen Withany." As Karen talked, I kept my eyes on Emma's building. Soon, Emma walked out with a man I assumed was Grant. "There they are," Karen said, quickly snapping photos before they got into a cab. "Got them. Now what?" "Now I focus on the building next door. Let's sit for a minute. It's still early." We sat on a nearby bench. "First, give me your email, and I'll send the pictures. That'll be $100. If you want more when they return, it's another $100. "Sure. If you give me the guy's name for $300 more, I can dig up information. We'll need a contract for that." "With your agency?" "No, I'm a freelancer." Today I'm working as a contractor for the agency hired by the lawyer's wife. And it's okay to hire you directly? As long as it doesn't interfere with my contract work, it's not a conflict. I texted Karen my email and Grant's full name. We chatted for a while, and I ended up telling her the whole story of why I was trying to save my marriage. Karen turned out to be a great listener. Curious, I asked, "How did you become a private investigator?" She laughed. "I spent 15 years with the NYPD, 6 in counterterrorism. After getting shot in the leg and losing everything below the knee, I went on disability." She pulled up her pant leg to reveal a prosthetic. "Now, I use my skills to make money and set my own schedule. It's working out so far. I usually don't work weekends, but I'm doing a favor for a friend." As she spoke, Karen snapped a few photos of a couple getting into a limo across the street. "Are you going to follow them?" "No, it's too risky. I'll grab a bite nearby and wait for them to return. Most just have dinner and head back to a love nest. There's not much romance in these cases." "So what do mistresses get besides dinner?" "You'd be surprised. Some women earn as much as a good secretary. They're willing to sell their soul." "No thanks." "What about the wives?" "Wives are half our business. Some poor guy working 60 hours a week finds out someone else is getting what should be his. The worst is when DNA tests show the kids aren't his. Those cases end badly. I had one client break into his ex-wife's house and liquidate himself on her bed. That must have hit her hard." "Not really. She was out of town. The housekeeper found the body, and by the time she got back from a spa in Cannes, the place was cleaned up and repainted. There aren't many happy endings in this business." We sat quietly for a moment. I wasn't going to do anything drastic, but I realized how much I'd miss my wife if we divorced. "If you're getting a snack, can I join you?" She shook her head. "No, Jeff. Go home. I'm meeting my husband at the diner. He'll be there in 10 minutes. She pointed to her wedding ring, which I noticed for the first time. What a detective I am, missing that detail. As we walked, I realized I was limping, too focused on my problems. I tried to change the subject. "Does this work affect your marriage?" "It affects some of my coworkers, but I'm lucky. My husband, Bill, understands my job. He makes sure I know I'm loved, like tonight when he arranged for his mom to watch our boys so we could have dinner together." As we neared the diner, I saw a tall, fit man waiting. He was my height, but more muscular. Karen hugged him, and he kissed her while keeping an eye on me. "Bill, this is Jeff, my new client. Jeff, this is my husband, Bill." We shook hands, both giving firm but not overpowering grips. Bill smiled and asked, "Tight end?" "Good guess. Did you play?" "No, I was a heavyweight wrestler at Penn State." His smile grew wider as he hugged Karen. "Hungry?" he asked me. "No thanks. I'm heading to the train station. Karen, send me the contract when you can. I'll sign it and return it with payment." "Thanks for taking my case." Karen laughed. "Is that the right word?" I shook Bill's hand again. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Bill. You're a lucky man, but I think you're both lucky. Thanks for inviting me to dinner. You both give me hope." Bill glanced at Karen, who whispered, "I'll explain." I left with a smile. Sunday morning, I overslept, catching up on missed sleep. After brewing coffee, I started my laptop and downloaded all of Grant's archived emails. I also decided not to wait for Karen to call, but to reach out to her later that morning to find out what had happened Saturday night after I left. With coffee and a bagel, I began reading Grant Martin's emails. It quickly became clear that Grant was a manipulative idiot. Lois Taylor wasn't the only married woman he was involved with, and one email in his outbox answered many of my questions. The email read, "Dennis, it's time to return the favor. I've been entertaining a high society woman for the past 4 months. She's so snobbish she only gives me the time of day because of my so-called pedigree. What she doesn't know is my father disowned me years ago. You're probably wondering why I'm bothering with her. 2 reasons. Her daughter's a knockout, and the old lady is trying to wreck her daughter's marriage so she can set me up with her. Once we're together, she thinks we can keep seeing each other without anyone suspecting. Can you believe that? I also work for her husband, who's clueless. She's pushing her daughter to leave her husband, and I'm just waiting to swoop in. But I'm not the marrying type. Oh, and this woman is worth millions. I'm sending you a burner phone. When I call, pretend to be my father. I need you to play along. Don't mess it up. Remember, you owe me, from last year, your brother, TK Grant." Reading that, I almost felt sorry for Lois, but only for a second. This was way beyond what I could handle on my own, and I hoped Karen could help me figure out the next steps. While waiting for Karen's call, I spent hours on my computer. monitoring everything Grant did online. I even managed to get his user ID and password for his bank. By 2 p.m., I couldn't wait any longer and called Karen. "Hi, Jeff. I've been expecting your call. Sorry to bother you on a Sunday. Please apologize to your husband and kids, but I need to know what happened last night after I left. You'll be pleased to hear that your wife came back in a cab just after 10 o'clock. Grant walked her to the door, trying to convince her to let him in. She refused. He tried to kiss her, but she turned away and he only got her cheek. The doorman didn't let him in either. Grant left, clearly upset. So your wife didn't give in to his advances. She got home at a decent time and nothing inappropriate happened, except for going on the date in the first place." I was relieved Emma hadn't slept with Grant, but still angry about our crumbling marriage. "Remember what you told me last night? Her mother set her up. It doesn't excuse everything, but it explains a lot." "Agreed. But you should know this. It seems Grant is also involved with your mother-in-law, and Lois is trying to destroy your marriage to keep him around." "No kidding, that's cold. I've seen a lot in this business, but people's cruelty still shocks me. How did you find this out? If I tell you, is there some sort of client-detective confidentiality?" "No, Jeff. If I'm subpoenaed, I have to tell. So, if it's illegal, you need to decide whether to share it." I thought for a moment and then decided to tell her how I got the emails. Like many others, she was stunned by what I had done. I also mentioned that I had Martin's user ID and password to his bank accounts. "You can really access this guy's computer and see his passwords?" "Yes. Maybe later this week you can teach me how to protect myself from people like me. But for now, I'm going back to my family. We're watching The Wizard of Oz, and my kids are giving me the 'when are you getting off the phone?' Look." "Sorry, Karen. Call me tomorrow when you dig up more on Martin's background, and I'll fill you in on the rest." With that, we hung up, and I continued to go through Grant and Lois's emails. By Sunday evening, when Emma returned, I had gathered a lot of information but had no idea how to use it. All my belongings were still in the guest room. Emma burst into the kitchen where I was sitting with a beer. "Jeffrey, where are your clothes?" I ignored her question. "How was your date last night?" Her face showed a mix of guilt, shock, and confusion. "What are you talking about? I didn't go on a date." Emma said it with such conviction that I might have believed her if I hadn't seen her get into the cab with my own eyes. "What do you call going to a play with an unrelated man? You might want to look up the definition." There was that look again. "Were you following me?" "Not that it matters, but I went into town yesterday. I was planning to convince you and your mom that I should take you to the play. I arrived just in time to see you getting into a cab with some guy. Who was it?" I lied, but it sounded plausible, and I didn't want Emma to know what I really knew. "Jeff, my mom got sick at the last minute, and a friend of my parents drove me. Nothing happened." I pretended to be clueless. "And who is this kind friend? Does he have a name?" "Grant Martin. He works for my father." I decided to push her. "Emma, this is ridiculous. Your parents are trying to split us up. Think about it. I'll bet you $1,000 your mom miraculously recovered on Sunday. This illness was staged. How did Grant Martin just happen to be available at the last minute? It's time to wake up and realize our marriage is on the brink." Emma looked shocked, as if she'd been slapped. I didn't want the argument to escalate, so I left the kitchen and went to the guest room. It was a restless night, and I ended up leaving the house early, arriving at the office before 7. At 8, I got a notification on my phone. Emma had sent 2 texts to Sharon Roberts. I figured she had already talked to her mom, and Lois was filling her head with more nonsense. My marriage was circling the drain. Late Monday night, Karen called me at work. "Are you somewhere private?" I closed my office door. "Yes. What's up?" "First, remind me about Grant Martin's position at the bank. I've been focusing on his non-work activities." I glanced at my notes. "From what I've seen, he's a personal banker handling trust accounts and money management for wealthy clients. Yesterday, I watched him set up wire transfers for 2 clients. I'll confirm the transactions later when I'm home. I don't want to use my work computer. Did any of those transfers go to foreign banks?" "One went to France for a rich kid's tuition and living expenses in Paris." Karen paused before continuing. "I dug up some dirt on Grant. He had serious issues in college, enough that his family disowned him. He moved to New York to escape his past. I also talked to a friend in the NYPD. Last year, a college buddy of Grant's, Dennis Riley, stayed with him for a weekend. Riley picked up a girl at a bar, brought her back to Grant's place, and when she drank too much, Riley refused to call her a cab and instead attacked her, When she reported it, Riley claimed it was consensual, and Grant backed him up, saying the girl even hit on him. The DA dropped the case because it was 2 against 1. So Riley got away with it because Grant lied for him? Exactly. I read Karen the first line of Grant's letter to Dennis. She paused. Looks like Riley owes Grant big time for covering for him. How do you feel about getting back at these two? One's a rapist and the other's his enabler. No question. What's your plan? You mentioned you could access Grant's computer. How skilled are you? Could you use his identity to open foreign accounts and transfer his client's money? I know how to access his computer, but I'm not an expert in opening accounts. And I'm not interested in stealing money. If we do this right, no one will lose money. But we need to discuss it in person. Can you meet tomorrow night? I'd like to bring a friend. Karen, I have to ask, why are you doing this without expecting more payment? I agreed to pay you a few thousand for watching Emma and digging up dirt on Grant. Now we're talking about opening accounts and transferring money. What's in it for you? I can't afford to pay more, and I certainly can't afford to get caught. This is personal, Jeff. Years ago, someone pilled and attacked me. I was too embarrassed to report it right away, and by the time I did, there was no evidence left. I filed a complaint, but it went nowhere because it was just my word against his. So I'm doing this for that girl Dennis Riley attacked. She deserves to know not every prick gets away with it, and Grant Martin is going down too for helping him. They're both trash. Karen's voice softened as she shared her story, clearly still painful for her. Although I had only known Karen for a few days and spent a few hours with her, I was already determined to help her take down these pricks. As my grandmother used to say, sometimes doing the right thing means taking risks, even if it involves breaking the law. Before we ended the call, Karen asked me to send her all the information I had gathered from Martin's computer, bank accounts, loans, mortgages, and so on. I promised to get it to her that night. We also arranged to meet on Tuesday night. I made up an excuse to Emma about working late, but it didn't matter much since we were barely talking and sleeping in separate rooms. That Tuesday night, I met Karen at a quiet pub. She brought along a friend, Hank, who seemed like he had a background in intelligence, probably from one of the agencies. After I told Hank that I had access to Grant Martin's computer and his banking systems, they laid out their plan. First, we buy a plane ticket to Dubai for Martin using his credit card. Next, we open an account in Dubai under his name. Dubai is a popular place for hiding illicit funds since Switzerland got into trouble with the U.S. Treasury. Then, we set up wire transfers of several $1 million to Dubai scheduled for early in the day. I interrupted. Wait, no stealing. Hank reassured me. Don't worry, none of the money will actually leave the country. We'll make a small mistake in the transfer instructions that delays it, making it look like Martin tried to steal the money but messed up. I thought for a moment and then agreed. Okay, so what's next? Martin has a line of credit with over $100,000 available and $60,000 in a brokerage account. We'll transfer those funds to the Dubai account, and those transfers will go through. Do you have a problem with that? Not if it's his own money being transferred. Good. With his funds drained, he won't be able to afford a good lawyer, which will help us go after his buddy, Dennis Riley. Karen added, and the final step is to send a fake letter from Grant to Dennis. Here, read this. She handed me the letter. Dennis, forget about rich old women. I've got bigger plans. By tomorrow, I'll have enough money to last a long time, at least until I find another rich target. I'm leaving the country. Nothing here is worth sticking around for. I got a call today from an investigator asking about your little incident last year. You should have learned your lesson at USC, like I did. Make sure you get approval before you pull that stunt again, because I won't be around to cover for you. I'll let you know where I end up. I'm sure the feds will monitor this email after tomorrow, so don't respond. I'll delete this as soon as it's sent. Your brother, T.K. Grant. After reading, I smiled. You nailed his style, especially the misogynistic tone. Karen replied, I also found out why Martin's family disowned him. He and another guy attacked a girl at USC. She had a reputation, and after the incident, she eliminated herself. The family paid off the girl's family to keep it quiet and cut ties with Grant. This wasn't the first time they'd bailed him out. Karen's story only strengthened my resolve to take down Martin and Riley. Okay, I can handle all that with Hank's instructions, but we need to make sure Grant is at home, not at his computer when this goes down. How do we do that? Don't worry. Grant will be occupied. We've got it covered. Can we do it tomorrow night? No problem. What's the plan for Thursday? Grant will be arrested early Thursday morning before he has a chance to act. It'll look like he was about to flee the country. It's a pleasure working with professionals. Karen and Hank were indeed professionals. With Hank's guidance, everything went smoothly. Grant opened a new account in Dubai. His credit card was used to buy a first-class ticket to Dubai, and the line of credit and brokerage account were set up. The wire transfers were ready for Thursday morning, but the big transfer was intentionally botched, so it never went through. To ensure Grant was in his apartment all night, they used an expensive escort, likely a tactic Hank learned in his former line of work. The escort accidentally bumped into Grant after work and convinced him to have a drink with her. Grant, being full of himself, thought his charm had won her over and ended up taking her back to his apartment for another drink. The woman, experienced in deception, told Grant she had been mistreated by a guy before and wouldn't let it happen again. She demanded to see his ID. Grant, thinking with his little head, shrugged and handed over his driver's license. Sensing she wanted more, she then asked for his passport. Without questioning her logic, Grant fetched it from his office. She flipped through the pages, making small talk about his trips, then put the passport down, grabbed his tie, and led him to bed. At 8 a.m. Thursday, Grant Martin opened his door to find 2 detectives waiting. Despite his claims of innocence, he was quickly arrested, especially after they noticed his passport lying on the table. "Planning a trip, Mr. Martin?" one detective asked, while handcuffing him. Grant knew he had been set up, but didn't know by whom or how. All traces of the viruses on his and Lois's computers had been erased. I had sent a command to wipe his hard drive before the police arrived, making it seem like Grant had done it to cover his tracks. The police eventually retrieved copies of Grant's emails, including one confessing to giving a false statement and another outlining his plan to flee the country with stolen money. Thanks to Karen's contacts, the police offered to drop the false statement charges if Grant testified against Dennis Riley. True to his nature, Grant took the deal, leading to Dennis's extradition. Once Dennis learned of Grant's betrayal, the two turned on each other, tearing each other apart in court. Grant received no support from his family this time. Despite his protests, he was found guilty of theft and related charges and sentenced to 4 years in prison. Dennis, with Grant's testimony against him, got 10 years. By the time Grant testified, the two hated each other so much that Grant's testimony was especially damning. While this unfolded, I had personal matters to address. The day after Grant's arrest, I met with my father-in-law, Mr. Taylor. "I have some things that could hurt Emma if she sees them, but I think you should decide what to do with them. I hired a private investigator to understand why my marriage was falling apart, and I hope you're as shocked by this as I am." I handed Jonathan a folder of Lois's emails to Grant, avoiding any mention of how I got them. Jonathan read the letters slowly, pausing only to pour us both coffee. I was impressed that he served it himself instead of calling for help. When he finished, he looked at me, clearly troubled. "I asked you not to hurt my daughter. Knowing her mother used her like this would devastate Emma. I'm sorry. Then don't show her. I promise I won't bring it up during the divorce." "So you plan to divorce Emma? That would hurt her too." "That's not my choice. Your wife is determined to end your marriage, and she's convincing Emma it's the right thing to do." "Please, call me Jack," he said, surprising me. "Tell me more. I don't understand how Lois became so controlling of Emma." I explained. "Lois told Emma she gave up her career for her, that she was too young when she married and had Emma, and that you stopped her from pursuing a career. She's been laying guilt on Emma." Jack listened intently as I continued. "Emma feels she never had a real relationship with you or her mother. Seeing how my family interacts, she realized something was missing. When Lois finally started paying attention to her, Emma jumped at the chance for a connection." Jack was hard to read, but he suddenly became more candid. "Do you know what it's like to turn 60 and realize your life is a mess?" "No, I don't. I'm just venting. Lois claims she gave up her career. What a joke. The only things she's pursued are manicures and spa treatments. She always talked about being a professional tennis player. But after years of lessons, she still can't hit a decent backhand. I've spent most of my life building this bank, working long hours to make it successful. That's how I was raised. We didn't expect to be best friends with our wives. We focused on business. I spent more time with my golf buddies than with my family because that's what Lois wanted. But until today, I had no proof of her cheating. I was blissfully ignorant." His honesty caught me off guard, and all I could say was, "I'm sorry I had to be the one to bring this to your attention." "No, Jeff. I'm grateful you brought this to me. It's one thing to have an affair, but it's another to sacrifice Emma's happiness to keep your lover around, especially with one of my employees." Grant was walking around the office, smug, knowing he was with my wife. Well, he won't be for a while. He was arrested this morning for stealing from a client and providing false information in a criminal case. If what we heard from the police is true, Grant Martin will be gone for a long time. As for Lois, she has her own trust fund worth millions, which works in my favor. During the divorce, that she'll be lounging at the spa or on the tennis court, shedding crocodile tears. Some new guy will pick her up and I'll be easily replaced. She'll lose some social standing. Other wives will avoid her to protect their own marriages. She'll also lose her relationship with Emma. But from what I've seen here, Jack held up the folder, she probably won't care much about that. And Emma? I wonder if it's too late to rebuild a relationship with my daughter. I do love her, but I let Lois control our relationship. That's another thing I owe Lois for. Somehow, I'll make her pay for all the pain she's caused. Maybe not right away, but I will. In the meantime, Jeff, I need your help. You say you love Emma. Do you think you can repair your marriage? I don't know, Jack. Logically, it's not her fault. She was manipulated by her mother, and it helps that she didn't sleep with Martin. At least I don't think so. But emotionally, that's the hard part. I'm not like you. I just showed you proof of your wife's infidelity, and you didn't shed a tear. You were a little angry, but you kept your cool. When Emma walked out that second weekend, I cried for the first time in my adult life. I don't know how you do it. Jonathan Taylor looked at me and made a decision. Because I've been bottling up my emotions for over 40 years. Let me tell you a story not many people know. Right after college, I enrolled in Navy flight school. It was tough, but I passed OCS. I was so proud the day those stripes appeared on my uniform in front of my parents. But then my life turned into a nightmare. I messed up and crashed, broke both legs and my back. Worse, my radar intercept officer, Ted Andrews, was eliminated. I spent 6 weeks in the hospital. When I could walk without crutches, I went to apologize to Ted's parents. I'll never forget the look on their faces, seeing the man responsible for their son's end of life. I returned to the base a broken man. I cried for days. The Navy discharged me and I went home. My parents were kind. They didn't blame me. They sent me to Harvard for my MBA, hoping I could move on. But not a week goes by that I don't think about what I could have done to prevent the accident. It wasn't because I was drunk or hungover. It was just a mistake that cost a man his life. Ted's parents never wanted to hear from me again, but I've dedicated part of my life to his memory. I donate $10,000 every year to the USO and a fund for wounded soldiers. After all that, dealing with an unfaithful wife seems like a small thing. I listened in silence. When he finished, I saw a man carrying a heavy burden for far too long. I realized there was something I could do to help lighten that load. Reflecting on my relationship with Emma, I considered how much her recent behavior had been out of character, driven by a desire to finally connect with a mother who had never shown her love. My thoughts drifted back to the first time I met Emma 8 years ago, during my work with the NGO. I spotted her on a bench at Columbus Square, looking like she could use a friend. I approached her, introduced myself, and we started talking. "Excuse me, I've seen you at the office. I'm Jeff Parker from IT. I extended my hand. She recognized me, but it was clear she had been crying. Instead of shying away, she offered a faint smile. "Yes, I've seen you too. I'm Emma Taylor." She shook my hand. "May I sit down, or would you rather be alone?" "No, please sit." Taking a chance, I asked, "It's clear you've been crying. Do you want to talk about it?" Emma hesitated. "Did you hear the news about the 2 girls in Sudan? Our NGO supported schools in Sudan and other parts of Africa and the Middle East. The girls there were taught reading, writing, domestic skills, and health education, which didn't always sit well with the local population." "No, I've been stuck in the server room all day," I replied. Yesterday in Juba, 2 sisters were dragged out of class by their grandparents, upset that the girls' parents allowed them to be educated. They accused the parents of turning the girls against Allah. This morning we heard the sisters had been mutilated, had their clitoris removed with the local imam's approval. I was speechless. I had heard of such practices, but had never encountered it firsthand. Emma continued, "I can't understand how people who claim to follow God can think it's right to destroy what God created." She paused. "Are we really helping or just making things worse?" "I don't have the answers, Emma, but my grandmother taught me something. When I was a kid, I was visiting my grandparents on their farm during a big storm. We saw a funnel cloud and tried to corral all the chickens into the barn. We got most of them in when Grandpa told me to head to the basement. I didn't understand why we were abandoning the rest, but Grandma explained, if you try to save everyone, you might end up saving no one." Emma looked at me with those beautiful eyes, really listening. I think you could apply your grandmother's wisdom to what your organization does. Save as many girls as you can from a hopeless life. You won't save them all, but don't lose sight of the good you're doing. Your grandmother sounds wise. But why do you say your organization? Don't you work for the NGO? Not exactly. I'm with KPMG under contract to upgrade their systems. When this is done, I'll move on to another assignment. That's the life of a consultant. 2 months from now, I could be in California or Virginia. It must be hard to make friends living like that. I can't imagine such a nomadic life. I've only lived in 2 places, here in Manhattan and at Princeton, where I go to school. You're still in school? Yes, I have 1 year left at Princeton. I'm here as an unpaid summer intern. That must be tough. Not really. My father believes in community service. He gives me an allowance and covers my tuition, so money's not an issue. When I graduate next spring, I'll try living on my own. For now, I'm focused on my studies and helping out here. That sounds nice, I said, realizing it might come off as sarcastic, but Emma didn't take offense. Yeah, I'm lucky. I have friends who struggle to pay tuition and rent. Having financial support makes being a student easier. As Emma spoke, I realized how different she was from the wealthy people I'd met at Wharton. In our 30-minute conversation, she expressed genuine concern for strangers in Sudan and her classmates. I later learned that on the same day we met, she had been hit by a cab on her way to work and had a large bruise on her thigh, which she didn't mention until days later. This was someone worth knowing. But before I could say anything, she surprised me again. Jeff, you mentioned it's hard to make friends when you're always moving. Would you like to have dinner with me sometime? Of course, I replied. That was the start of our friendship, which grew into a relationship now threatened by her mother's manipulation. After leaving Jack's office, I returned home. Emma walked in to find dinner on the stove, a bottle of Merlot breathing, and a dozen red roses on the table. It took her a moment to notice the 3 place settings. I see we're expecting guests. Who? Your father. My father? What about my mother? Did something happen to her? No, nothing happened to your mother. Your father and I just want to talk with you. Go wash up. He'll be here any minute. Thank goodness Jack rang the bell right away. I don't think I could have held Emma back much longer. My plans for a quiet dinner were likely too optimistic. The wine was poured and the pasta was on the plates. But as soon as we sat down, Emma demanded to know why her father was there without her mother. Jack took the lead, explaining what Lois had been up to over the past few months. Emma became hysterical, crying, "No, no, no!" until Jack moved with her to the couch where she wept on his chest. I cleaned up the kitchen, took Samson for a walk, and gave them some privacy. When I returned half an hour later, Emma met me at the door, her eyes still red. Jeff, I'm so sorry. Please tell me you want to stay together. I do, Emma. I never stopped loving you. My biggest fear was that you had changed your mind and would leave me, but I was wrong. You were manipulated by your mother, and now that's over. And my father? He wants to mend our relationship, but he's afraid I'll be wary after what happened with my mother. He wants us to work on repairing our marriage first. He's going on vacation soon and wants to take us to an island in the Bahamas to get to know us better. That's wonderful. We'll figure out the details later, but for now, that sounds great. Let's try to eat. I reheated dinner, so the pasta isn't perfect, but it will do. The 3 of us sat down to dinner again, taking the first step toward healing. Though it took almost a year for Jack to find the time for a 2-week vacation with us on the island, he spent most weekends with us, reconnecting with Emma and getting to know the daughter he regretted not bonding with earlier. Like I did when I first met Emma, he was pleasantly surprised by her kindness and selflessness. Having Jack involved in our lives helped Emma recover from her mother's betrayal. Over the next few months, we worked on rebuilding our marriage. It was easier knowing Emma had never cheated or lost her moral compass. The night with Grant was purely platonic. Though Grant had tried, he had met the wrong woman. We eventually spent a week with Jack and Emma on Cat Island in the Bahamas. Emma stayed a few extra days with her father after I returned to work. My project was completed on time and on budget, and I was promoted to IT director with a nice bonus. Emma also had to be convinced she could still wear a bikini on the island despite her new curves. Our son, Paul Jonathan Parker, named after both grandfathers, was born a little over a year after that dinner. Our daughter, Claire Emma Parker, Claire after my mother, was born 2 years later. Jack retired at 63 and now spoils his grandchildren, even buying a small apartment nearby as a second home. Things didn't go as well for Lois. Jack divorced her shortly after our meeting. Though it likely cost him a fortune in legal fees, The evidence of her attempt to destroy her daughter's marriage, along with her millions in trust funds, allowed Jack to walk away without paying alimony and retaining enough assets for a comfortable retirement. Once Lois's scheming became public, she became a pariah. She first moved to Palm Beach, but her reputation followed her. She was denied membership in local tennis clubs and spent 9 months there without making a single friend. She then moved to Palm Springs, thinking distance would help. But though she mingled with the wealthy, she couldn't compete with younger women for attention. Like many aging women with low self-esteem, she resorted to plastic surgery, which unfortunately left her looking unnatural. I only know about her failed facelift because 2 years after Claire was born, Lois showed up at our door. When I answered, it took me a moment to recognize her. I didn't even open the screen door. "Lois, what are you doing here?" I made no effort to hide my lack of warmth. "I want to see my daughter and grandchildren." "Lois, you're not welcome here. No one in this house wants to see you. Now go away." It took everything I had not to shout. "You have no right to keep me from seeing Emma and the kids. Open the door." "You don't get it, Lois. Emma doesn't want to see you and will do everything to keep you from poisoning our kids with your bitterness." I started to close the door, but paused. "What have you done to your face?" The words slipped out. Lois looked stunned as I shut the door. She didn't give up easily. The next day, while I was at work, Lois called the house. Emma later told me the conversation was brief. Emma confirmed that Lois was persona non grata in our home and around the kids. Lois tried to bribe her, offering $10,000 per visit for the kids' college fund. Emma refused. Lois even showed up at the daycare, which led us to get a restraining order. When she tried to call Jack, he laughed and hung up. Last we heard, Lois was back in Palm Springs with a gigolo who had already taken a significant amount of money from her. How sad. Sometimes bad things happen to bad people. It reminded me of my final act against Grant Martin. Using an alias, I sent him a letter, a short 8-sentence poem. "Your lawyer said you're innocent, but the jury thought otherwise. For the crime that brought you down, justice found its way. I'm innocent," you said again, "but karma had its say. Now you know, a-hole, you messed with the wrong one."
My wife cheated on me with a 15-year friend during my work trip. I confronted them, got my revenge. I'm Steve, and my wife's Kate. We've been married for more than 3 years. The first year was really happy, the second was good, and the third had some issues. It might seem silly or childish. I can't say I disagree, but I'm not sure if you would react differently. We were in the middle of an argument. We've had a lot of those lately, Kate and I, but this one was really bad. I don't even know what it was about, something small like the laundry or an unpaid bill. Kate has this habit of bringing up irrelevant complaints during arguments, things that have nothing to do with what we're fighting about. It could be stuff from years ago, like when I didn't pick up her sister from a party, or just random things that occur to her to hit me with. This was one of those times. "And you just never stop talking. Do you know that, Steve?" She said this in a harsh tone. Nothing makes you happier than the sound of your own voice, even when we're, in bed. There was silence. Kate must have seen from my face that she went too far. I was hurt, so I just looked at her. I thought about saying I had no idea my talking during closeness bothered her. It's how I express my love and excitement. But then I decided not to say anything. Kate continued, saying my talking distracts her during closeness and turns her off. I was surprised. Why hadn't she mentioned this before? We've been married for over 3 years, and I thought she enjoyed my affectionate words. She talked less than I did in bed, but she always said a few words. After a long silence, I stood up and told Kate I'd try to only speak when it's important. Then I left the room. Update, I wasn't proud of my actions afterward. All I can say is I felt really hurt. The unexpected argument hit me hard. I thought if she wanted silence, then she would get silence. Our fights were getting worse. Despite still loving Kate, we found it harder and harder to be content with each other. There were fewer happy times and more tense moments, and arguments over small things. A major issue was my job as a sales rep for a plumbing supply company, requiring me to travel for about 3 weeks, 4 days a month. Kate didn't like me being away so much, but she knew this before we got married. She also wanted to start a family, which I resisted for another 2 years. I expected a promotion that would let me stop traveling. I just didn't want to have a baby until I could be home all the time. So those were the big issues. Lately, even tiny things seemed to trigger fights. The reservoir of love and goodwill seemed almost empty, and I didn't know why. One thing Kate said kept bothering me, that my talking during closeness was the opposite of what turned her on. Did that mean she was enjoying closeness with someone else? Someone who didn't talk, it seemed far, fetched until I thought about it more? During my last trip, about 10 days. Earlier, I couldn't reach her on the phone twice. The second time, she had her cell phone switched off when she should have been back from work. The next day, she said she went for a beer with friends, which seemed reasonable, except I called the house around 10:30 and she was still out. Also, in the past month, 3 times I answered the phone and the person hung up. Not a big deal, but it rarely happened before, so I got more suspicious and took action. For the next 2 weeks, Kate probably thought she was living with a mute. No small talk, no idle conversation, no words unless absolutely necessary. Instead of saying, "Could you pass the salt, honey?" I got up and got it myself. In response to, "What's the weather going to be like today?" I passed her the weather page of the newspaper. If she asked me to make dinner that night, all she got was, "Okay." When she left for work and said, "Goodbye, honey," I gave her a smile and a wave. It became a game to see how few words I could say to her in a day. Kate knew I was angry and hurt, and she knew why. At first, she didn't seem to care much, but after that, she started trying to make up. She didn't exactly apologize, that was rare in our house, but she became much more affectionate. Kisses greeted me in bed in the morning, on the way out for work, and at bedtime. Sometimes she leaned over to give me a hug while I was reading the paper over coffee in the morning, or rubbed my shoulders while we were watching TV. It was a funny thing, even as my anger gradually calmed down and nobody can stay white-hot angry over days, I kept saying as little as possible. Before speaking, I'd ask myself if I really needed to say it, and usually the answer was no. I was listening more, observing more, and keeping my thoughts to myself. About 10 days after the argument, Kate suggested we make love. Whether she wanted to or it was part of making up, I couldn't tell. After dinner, during which she told me some stories about work and I spoke no more than 6 words, she stood up and took me by the hand, urging me to leave the dishes for later. With a big, warm smile, she conveyed that there was something else she needed at that moment. As she led me back to the bedroom, I wondered if the distance between us had grown because of my silence, or if I was silent because we had already drifted so far apart. During the entire encounter, I hadn't uttered a word. As we coupled smoothly, easily, and familiarly, I remained completely silent, feeling a sense of unnatural coldness and distance. I wasn't even sure if it was what Kate truly wanted, but after that argument, I had no intention of saying a word. After we finished, I rolled off her, and she snuggled into me, emitting a happy, Without any verbal communication, we relaxed together for a while, still without exchanging any words. I couldn't discern what the experience had been like for her. For me, it felt cold and empty, and whether that was due to the silence or the growing distance between us remained uncertain. Update: after a few more days of minimal conversation, Kate became upset with me. One night during dinner, she expressed frustration, questioning my silence and whether I had anything to say. After a moment of thought, I responded that I thought this was what she wanted. She clarified, explaining that she desired a husband who communicates and shares feelings, not someone resembling a mannequin from a department store. Privately, I chuckled, thinking, "Good one, Kate." Last week she had complained about me talking too much, so I was making an effort to rectify that. Kate accused me of taking the silent treatment too far, labeling it the Silent Sam routine. I looked at her for a moment before speaking. Some of my confusion was intended to annoy her, and partly, I was genuinely puzzled. I honestly didn't know what she wanted. First, I talked too much, then, too little. "How am I supposed to know what to do now?" She glared at me, clearly very angry, insisting that I stop and be the man she married. I regretted my earlier words, stating that she doesn't talk too much. We were arguing. I was upset, and I just threw that at her. After a pause, I added, "All right, Kate, but I have to admit, your words got me thinking that maybe I do talk too much, or without thinking first about whether I really have anything to say." After a moment, I smiled at her, saying, "In a way, all this has been helpful." She smiled back warmly, her anger seemingly gone, and for a moment I felt the closeness between us that had been missing. I then brought up the topic of making love, genuinely seeking to understand. I asked if she meant what she said about not talking during closeness. Rather than answering my question, Kate left the table. For the rest of the evening, she gave me the cold shoulder, which didn't seem fair despite my honest attempt to understand her feelings. The next morning brought a more hopeful atmosphere. Kate had stepped back from her initial attack, expressing a desire for communication. Unfortunately, her focus remained on the end of the conversation, evident in her glares and tight-lipped phrases at breakfast. We endured a few more days of minimal communication, ironic this time, as she was giving me the silent treatment. After 3 to 4 days, Kate's mood drastically changed again. She came home from work looking very upset and headed straight for the shower. Over dinner, she was distracted, saying little and frequently losing track of my conversation. This wasn't the angry, silent treatment anymore. She was clearly preoccupied with something. But when I asked her if something was wrong, and I asked several times, she only mentioned a problem at work. I noticed, though, that she wouldn't meet my eyes when she said it. Unsure of what was bothering her, I decided to wait and see. The next day, I received a call at work. Ernie Matazzo confirmed my suspicions about Kate having an affair. I thanked him, left work, and went home. Looking at the photos, the only surprise was the guy, Adam, who hadn't been my best man but was one of my groomsmen. He'd always admired Kate, and I'd never considered him a threat. I felt cold and empty, like the last time Kate and I were in bed together. I sat for a long time, contemplating everything, and pulled out the photos, finding them unchanged from the first time I put them away. Update: when Kate arrived home, she found me seated on the couch, seemingly idle. I remained quiet as she greeted me, my expression crafted to appear neutral rather than angry. Her inquiry about my unusual behavior grew more pointed, a blend of concern and annoyance evident in her edgier tone as she probed further, sensing that something was amiss. I maintained my silence. Frustration welled within her as she pressed for an explanation, insinuating a return to the silent treatment of the past. In response, I sat up, cutting through the tension with a direct question. I asked her how long she had been dating him. Kate, taken aback, recoiled in shock and retreated a step. Perplexed, she took a seat across from me, seeking to understand my accusation. Her attempts to read my expression proved futile. The atmosphere thickened as she continued to deny any involvement with someone else, clasping her hands tightly in her lap as she implored me to reveal the source of my accusations. Her plea, laden with frustration, suggested that I harbored a guilty conscience. Unyielding, I presented an envelope containing a photograph, a damning image of Kate on Adam's bed. She looked at it briefly, dropped it in surprise, and recoiled as though it were a threat. Blushing, she retreated into her chair, avoiding eye contact. In the face of my persistent silence, she decided to change the subject, heading for the bedroom. However, I intercepted her with the incriminating photo. She hesitated, and unable to escape my unrelenting gaze, she finally met my eyes with a silent plea. "How long?" I reiterated. Her response was a withdrawal into herself, arms wrapped tightly around her as she shook her head. The silence lingered, and she eventually appealed to me, requesting that I spare her from discussing the matter. Declaring my decision to leave, I moved toward the bedroom to pack. In a desperate plea, she implored me to wait, promising to disclose everything. Relenting, I resumed my seat, observing her as she struggled to maintain eye contact. Unable to endure the silence, she confessed, apologizing and expressing remorse as she pleaded with me not to leave. I remained seated, meeting her gaze with an unwavering expression. She averted her eyes, and after a moment, she mustered the courage to look back at me, tearfully admitting that Adam had told her I was also involved. Surprised, I refrained from questioning her and gestured for her to continue. Kate explained that a month earlier she had encountered Adam at the supermarket. He, being charming and friendly, had offered her companionship in my absence, arriving at our house with pizza and wine. They spent a casual evening together, misled by Adam's claim that I too was engaged in similar actions. Towards the end, he started acting worried and concerned. When Kate questioned him about it, he claimed I had been unfaithful. He did an impressive job at acting, appearing reluctant, with his head hanging, avoiding an eye contact with me. According to him, you and he had a conversation a couple of weeks earlier where you confessed about a girl you were involved with during your trips. He provided convincing details about her appearance, where you met, and how great you said she was in bed. I started crying, and Adam consoled me, expressing admiration for my beauty and how he couldn't fathom how any man could cheat on me. A little while later, we ended up in bed together, and I only found out yesterday that the entire story was false. I waited, expressionless. She continued, her expression now more somber than before. "I found myself in his apartment," she said. "After he had this smug demeanor. He brought up the notion that if it weren't for your involvement with Julia, we wouldn't have realized how well we connect." I raised the issue of inconsistency, reminding him that during our initial conversation about your supposed lover, he had mentioned the name Joanne. He couldn't recall any of the details, like her appearance or how you met. Frustrated, I screamed at him to tell me the truth. "Did you really cheat on me?" He laughed, admitting it was just a story to get me into bed. Kate's face turned red with anger. I got up, threw on my clothes, and berated him, calling him out for making a fool of me, she continued. He just lay there, smiling, unapologetic and unremorseful. I couldn't believe what I had done. She trailed off, her voice choked with emotion, and then she broke down, sobbing with her face in her hands, her body heaving. The urge to comfort Kate was overshadowed by a cold emptiness. Was she truly that naive, or had our love deteriorated to the point where she was willing to believe even the most absurd stories? And then there was my rage at Adam, a friend of 15 years. I sat in silence while Kate sobbed. After about 5 minutes, I stood up. Kate watched me fearfully as I took her cell phone from her purse, put it in my pocket, and went to the bedroom and kitchen, unplugging the phones and putting them in a bag under my arm. Before departing, I glanced back at Kate and conveyed that I would return. I instructed her not to leave and cautioned against engaging in conversations with anyone. Despite my quiet tone, she appeared terrified and affirmed my instructions with a nod. Update on the way to Adam S. I focused on controlling my breath to appear calm and friendly. When Adam opened his door, he seemed surprised and nervous. Without hesitation, I invited him for a couple of beers and suggested watching the Phillies, saying Kate was at a meeting. Though he observed me carefully, he put on a friendly demeanor and agreed to my proposal. We sat in his living room, chatting amiably while the game played in the background. Keeping the conversation light, I noticed Adam gradually relaxing, thinking it was a casual visit. However, I remained uncertain about the situation. It took more than an hour to steer the conversation toward relationships. I inquired about the ladies he was dating, making him momentarily nervous, but my reassuring smile prompted him to share details about a girl from work he'd been seeing casually. I mentioned a talkative college girlfriend, and Adam took the bait, agreeing that actions speak louder than words during intimate moments. Laughing, he boasted about revealing the desires of many girls, expressing satisfaction. Leaning in, I asked about Kate's preferences, catching him off guard. After a moment of shock, he tried to laugh it off, but I kept pressing him with a smile. He finally agreed to be quiet, looking at me fearfully. Expressing my disbelief, I confronted him about betraying our friendship and deceiving my wife to have an affair with her. Downplaying it, he claimed it wasn't a big deal, arguing, she's just a woman. He trailed off uncertainly, looking at my face. Staring at him in disbelief, I questioned how I had ever been friends with him. Asserting that things were better out in the open, I insisted he tell me everything about his deceitful game with Kate. Having already talked to her, I warned that lying wouldn't work. Wide-eyed and genuinely afraid, Adam nodded at me, signaling his readiness to talk. He recounted the story, aligning closely with what Kate had said. He had always found her attractive and had been flirting with her for several months whenever he encountered her. He was single. One week he bumped into her at the supermarket and saw his chance. Initially thinking he could seduce her, he fabricated a story about my affair. When it became apparent she wouldn't cheat on me, he deliberately angered her and made her feel sorry for herself, making it easier to get her into bed. They met about 5 more times, always at his place. The first encounter was great because she was upset about my alleged affair, she cried. However, the subsequent times were fantastic, exactly as he described. When he noticed my disapproval, he abruptly stopped talking. I had cut his hair almost to the roots by then, finding satisfaction in picturing him hiding his head with hats for weeks. Coldly, I inquired if it was over. After a brief hesitation, he admitted it was and shared that she found out about the fabricated story. Unable to recall the name of the supposed girl I was dating, she got angry and left. I was ready to leave, feeling empty. Although I could have pressed for more details, I decided against it. I informed Adam that our friendship was over, warning against retaliation. We agreed not to involve the police. He nodded, looking more humiliated than angry, and requested to be released. Smiling, I assured him I'd leave the apartment door open, allowing him to free himself in about an hour. I walked away without turning back. Update: upon my return, Kate was seated on the couch in her bathrobe, her wet hair indicating recent distress. As I moved around the apartment, fixing the phones, she remained visibly scared and unhappy. Taking a seat across from her, we exchanged glances, but I maintained my silence. Eventually, she inquired about my actions, to which I explained the conversation with Adam, assuring her that I hadn't. Resorted to violence and expressing doubt about hearing from him anytime soon. Despite acknowledging that she almost wished I had confronted him physically, she recognized the potential consequences. Troubled, she sought to move past the situation, admitting her foolishness and asking for forgiveness. I looked at her for a prolonged moment before responding, our pattern of saying very little to each other becoming a habit. I dawned to know, I finally replied, and it was an honest admission. Tears welled up in her eyes as she began to cry. The following morning, Kate entered the kitchen, expressing delight at the breakfast and coffee set on the table. Her joy faded abruptly upon noticing the 2 large suitcases near the door. Distraught, she questioned my departure, pleading with me not to leave. Instead of leaving without a word, I served her a cup of coffee and persuaded her to sit across from me. Kate, it's over, I declared. I admitted uncertainty about what had transpired or why, but emphasized that our relationship had deteriorated. Despite acknowledging our initial compatibility, I highlighted a year of impatience, snappiness, and constant fighting. I pointed out that her choice to believe Adam's dubious story about my infidelity and her subsequent actions indicated a departure from the woman I had married. I suggested she must have been on the verge of straying for our relationship to reach this point. Pausing, I waited for her response, but she cried silently, holding her face in her hands. When I ceased speaking, she looked up at me pleadingly. I offered her an opportunity to speak, to prove me wrong, to outline a path to revive our love. Regrettably, she remained silent, merely gazing at me and crying. I headed to the door, bidding her farewell as I picked up my suitcases and departed.